1741. Invisible net falls from the sky. Chapter 1727. Invisible net descends. Who can discern, who can know, what is like truth and like falsehood? The world that fellow Taoist Fan just derived has reached the pinnacle of illusion, almost truth, surpassing the usual meaning of deduction. Shou Chu Gong still seemed immersed in the simulated scene, and couldn't help but exclaim. Dao De was also amazed. The great path of truth and falsehood is so profound. Rather than saying it's a deduction, it's more like a real world. It just exists in fellow Taoist Fan's mind, rising and disappearing with his thoughts. From the information currently available, that mysterious Shanghai walker indeed could be Chu Tianwei. Wandering the mountain and sea, surveying the whole situation. What he is plotting is no small matter. Li Fan smiled. Let them fight. With the change of truth and falsehood in our hands, we are almost invincible. We just need to proceed step by step to smoothly reach the beginning of the mountain and sea. Even the matter of the divided soul might not be impossible to investigate. The trio of Li Fan secretly communicated, and within the Xuanji ring of the other shore, the sages were also discussing animatedly. They had originally intended to follow the clues to find where Chu Tianwei and his wife's main bodies were hidden. But they hadn't expected them to have already transformed into incarnations and fled. Yet, they deliberately left behind two thoughts and anchors. Although not the main body, it still involved the secret of the mountain and sea's living beings. If it fell into the hands of the void realm, the mountain and sea might instantly fall into a crisis. Ultimately, the Lianshan three sages made up their minds. No matter what, the importance of the mountain and sea ahead is beyond doubt. The void realm's heavy encirclement, if we openly attempt to reconnect, might provoke a violent reaction. Since we've discovered this my luo they left, we can use it to infiltrate. Suppress and protect these two. After ensuring their safety, we will initiate the reconnection from the downstream mountain and sea. We will coordinate from inside and outside to break the void realm's encirclement. As the Lianshan three sages spoke, they turned their gaze to Thief of Opportunities. Among those present, you are the only lucky individual among living beings. Thief of Opportunities, expression was normal, and he nodded in agreement. I was just thinking of meeting them. After you go, you must maintain your hard nature and prioritize the overall situation of the mountain and sea. Lianshan Saint instructed with deep meaning. Then, under the gaze of the sages, Thief of Opportunities instantly closed his eyes. The infant he was originally attached to suddenly dissipated like a point of light. Floating in the void realm, he struggled to move upstream against the invisible mountain and sea my luo. Trembling, he moved with extreme difficulty. For every distance he traveled, the light point he had condensed dissipated a bit. When he finally succeeded in infiltrating the mountain and sea ahead, he had already become extremely dim, almost indistinguishable from an ordinary mortal. It seems that the mountain and sea's living beings' innate repulsion towards external objects is indeed extraordinary. The power attached to fellow Taoist Thief of Opportunities has been greatly eroded. After being born into the mountain and sea ahead, he will likely no longer possess the strength of a saint. He will be no different from a mortal. The sages all shook their heads slightly at the sight. The most important thing is whether fellow Taoist Thief of Opportunities can retain his memories. If he can, with his ability, even if he starts from the mortal realm, it will be a mere trifle. Gui Ming had great confidence in Thief of Opportunities Saint. Let's observe. Thief of Opportunities, main body remained motionless like a stone statue, while the other sages patiently awaited the change. After an unknown period, as if seeing something, Lianshan Saint suddenly said, "There's no need to wait idly. Let's resume the bait strategy. If Thief of Opportunities fails, there's still room for maneuver." Hearing this, the sages' hearts immediately tightened. Although it wasn't explicitly stated, the implication was clear. Thief of Opportunities' current mission might very well fail. They needed to make other plans early. What did Lianshan see? Li Fan was also somewhat puzzled. He had fought against Thief of Opportunities Saint before and knew that his hard nature and perseverance were among the top existences of the mountain and sea's living beings. He should not have failed. Although doubts arose, it did not prevent the sages from scattering living being bait again. In an instant, starlight twinkled, and countless new living beings began to gestate. This time, the lucky winner was Bai Xiao Saint. He muttered to himself, a look of bad luck on his face. Just then, Thief of Opportunities Saint suddenly opened his eyes. Unbeknownst to what kind of change he had suffered, it actually affected the instability of his main body's qi. He spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, and his complexion instantly paled. Under the sage's gaze, it seemed as if the great path of thief of opportunities he controlled had been cut off, losing a portion. Such a sudden change immediately caused the sages in the Xuanji ring to be startled and alarmed. Li Fan narrowed his eyes, pouring true spirit into him thoughtfully. At the same time, he took the opportunity to observe closely whether thief of opportunities was feigning it. He found that thief of opportunities' injuries this time were indeed extremely severe, not faked. His heart was even more dumbfounded. The sages did not urge him, but waited for thief of opportunities to recover slightly before asking about what had happened ahead. How strange. I clearly entered the mountain and sea ahead by tracing the flow, and even if Tao annihilation was present, the maximum difference would be no more than 100,000 years. But what I saw was a barbaric scene. The mountain and sea were not visible, the great path was chaos. Fierce individuals emerged in droves. It was just like the rumored Taichu Immortal realm. Thief of opportunities took a deep breath, his expression serious. Taichu Immortal realm. The sages were astonished. To confirm where thief of opportunities had gone earlier, they looked up again. Although the mountain and sea ahead were heavily encircled by the void realm, their general situation was not significantly different from the current mountain and sea. It seems my observation was correct. Lianshan Saint spoke at this moment. May I ask Lianshan Saint, what exactly did he see? The sages quickly asked. It wasn't that I saw anything. Rather, fellow Taoist thief of opportunities disappeared from my sight the moment he entered the mountain and sea ahead. Lianshan truthfully replied. Guihai sage's expression also gradually became serious, vast and boundless, covering the sky and obscuring the sun. Spanning ancient and modern times, connecting the mountain and sea. Has that old friend of ours appeared? He wasn't. How could he appear here? The great path of the mountain and sea's living beings involves the origin of the mountain and sea. Even we must treat it with caution. If those fellows at the beginning of the mountain and sea perceive us, like we are doing, following the clues to find its origin and then trying to devour it, it is to be expected. Tai Saint's eyes flashed with killing intent. The Zongsheng cudgel in front of him seemed to sense something, appearing out of nowhere. And it looked eager to try. Thief of opportunities finally couldn't help but ask, may I ask the three sages, who exactly is the one who set up the situation ahead? The Taichu Immortal realm I experienced. His name is Suo. He likes to devour mountains and seas with the power of longitude and latitude. The scene you experienced earlier should be the superficial appearance of the mountain and sea that he swallowed back then. Now he has released it to cover the current mountain and sea. Lianshan Saint explained to everyone. The other shore sages were all visibly shaken. No one had expected that, under the sages' watchful eyes, an invisible great net had already enveloped the mountain and sea ahead. The current situation clearly indicated that Suo had already taken it as his possession. Suo has always been timid and cautious, always hidden at the beginning of the mountain and sea, unwilling to leave any trace in later generations. His sudden appearance now. It seems that a great variable has emerged at the beginning of the mountain and sea. He finally couldn't hold back anymore. In front of Guihai Sage, the Guihai shovel also quietly appeared with his words. Clearly, like Tai Saint, he had truly developed killing intent. Don't get flustered, but Lianshan Saint interrupted him with a single sentence. Lianshan Saint's expression remained as calm as ever. We are not in our full state, and, Suo. He is extremely rare, having descended in his true body. If we truly confront him, I'm afraid we won't fare well. We still need to plan carefully. When Lianshan Saint made this statement, the Xuanji ring fell into a dead silence. Taichu Saint, true body descending. His strength was naturally imaginable, being able to compete with the three sages in their full state. Although they were all in the saint realm, their combat power was not comparable. Now, even the three sages, after several reconnections, said they wouldn't fare well, so they probably wouldn't be his match. To encounter such a fierce individual, no wonder thief of opportunities suffered such a crushing defeat. Li Fan suddenly realized. With the sudden change obstructing their Tao, the three sages did not act rashly. Instead, they once again inquired in detail about thief of opportunities' encounter. After that wisp of my incarnation was swallowed, my memories were not fully inherited. I only vaguely remember that when I fell into that Taichu Immortal realm, it was as if I was subjected to the hostility of the entire world. All the living beings I saw around me, for no reason, rushed to kill me. They fought relentlessly. I fought and fled, exhausting all my strength, but I ultimately couldn't escape such a killing tribulation. Thief of opportunities seemed to say, still unwilling. Moreover, the living beings who initially pursued me were not much stronger than me when I first descended. But as my strength slowly recovered and increased, the strength and number of the enemies pursuing me also increased dramatically. It was as if the other party deliberately played with me, making me believe there was hope for survival. And then, step by step, slowly torturing me to death. Thief of opportunities, face grew uglier with the memory. Tai nodded. Indeed, it is Suo's method. Not yet born, not yet dead. Only in such circumstances can the full potential of a living being be stimulated. Only then can Suo complete this full meal. I suppose you were forced to use the thief of opportunities method to deal with the crisis. And you were just exploited by him in this way. Only then did Thief of Opportunities realize the reason for the damage to the great path he controlled. Both surprised and angry, he added with some incomprehension, with the depth of my Tao mastery, I can still be influenced by others. Lianshan Saint gently waved his hand, calming Thief of Opportunities' state of mind. He slowly said, the great paths we control all originate from the mountain and sea. Suo's specialty is devouring mountains and seas. He is merely taking food from others' plates. Doesn't that mean my injuries cannot recover? Thief of Opportunities suddenly understood something a moment later, and was startled. Not necessarily. What Suo cares about is only the mountain and sea itself. He devours Thief of Opportunities only to swallow mountains and seas. Once he fully comprehends the principles of the mountain and sea within it, he will voluntarily spit out the Thief of Opportunities great path he devoured. If he only took in and didn't spit out, Suo would have become a target for everyone long ago, and wouldn't have survived until now. Gui Hai Sage comforted him. Hearing this, Thief of Opportunities finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, the great path he originally controlled had been taken and swallowed by someone. To return it, he would have to wait until the other party had finished digesting it. This truly made Thief of Opportunities feel a sense of frustration he had never experienced before. I only regret that I was just a divine thought, a divided soul. If my main body had gone personally, who would have been able to devour more? It's still unknown, Thief of Opportunities snorted coldly. Although he said so, he was still in the Xuanji ring. Influenced by the three sages, unity of purpose, Thief of Opportunities naturally wouldn't easily risk his life in a desperate fight. What Suo seeks should be the mountain and sea's living beings. We cannot let him have his way. But how exactly to break the situation? Lianshan glanced at Bai Xiao Saint. Despite Bai Xiao's utmost reluctance, he could only follow suit. Following that mountain and sea Mai Luo, he divided his consciousness and entered it. Whether intentional or not, Bai Xiao's performance was even far worse than Thief of Opportunities. That ball of light had dissipated by more than half before it even officially entered the mountain and sea. When it successfully disappeared, only a speck of light remained. From its appearance, it should have been no different from Immortal. As expected, not long after, Bai Xiao opened his eyes again. It truly is the scene of the Taichu Immortal realm. Both grand and fierce. However, Bai Xiao did not suffer the loss of origin like Thief of Opportunities. It should be because he learned his lesson and did not use his own great path of Thief of Opportunities. He recounted his experience to everyone with lingering fear. My experience was similar to fellow Taoist Thief of Opportunities. As soon as I was born, I was pursued by all living beings in the surrounding world. However, with fellow Taoist Thief of Opportunities experience, I tried to hide my strength during the confrontation. But Bai Xiao coughed lightly. That world seemed to be able to completely perceive everything about my body. The fierce creatures sent to descend were all precisely what I could only deal with by exhausting all my strength. Realizing this, to avoid being toyed with, I voluntarily ended my life. The sages fell silent. Let's probe again. Lianshan Saint pondered for a moment, then said again. And so the story repeated itself. The third lucky person was Fang Kun. Fang Kun did not mind the temporary loss of his origin and tried his best to cope. The duration he managed to persist was even several times longer than Thief of Opportunities. But in the end, he still crumbled. Evidently, the longer he persisted, the more origin he was invisibly exploited and devoured. When Fang Kun's consciousness returned, he was clearly severely wounded. His face was ashen, and his chi was like a faint wisp. Li Fan quickly infused him with true spirit. The three sages also each sent out a wisp of qi to stabilize Fang Kun's injuries. After his condition stabilized, Fang Kun described his experience to everyone. With the experience of the previous two fellow Taoists, I originally prepared to try a different method. Relying on my speed, I would only seize and not kill. Initially, it was effective. Although those fierce creatures came like a tide, they couldn't touch me in the slightest. Without having to fight, the strength of the fierce creatures remained at their initial level for a long time. But later, Fang Kun coughed lightly, they actually slowly mastered my great path of Fang Kun as well. Their speed became faster and faster, eventually almost matching mine. I had no choice but to fight them. Naturally, I followed in the footsteps of fellow Taoists Thief of Opportunities and Baishao. Fellow Taoist Fang Kun, to resolve the crisis of the mountain and sea, did not hesitate to lose his own origin great path. Truly a model for us. Baishao said with some shame. Fang Kun said earnestly, anyway, Suo will eventually spit it out. Compared to a temporary loss, it's more important to quickly figure out his plan and find a way to break it. The sages nodded, all deeply agreeing. However, the three sages did not continue to probe, but instead closed their eyes and began to deduce. 1742. Taiwei Saint Emperor Transformation. Chapter 1728. The Transformation of Taiwei Sacred Emperor. Its nature is to swallow mountains and seas. All mountain and sea beings who enter its domain cannot escape its net. Once caught in the net, one must experience 4 steps: sensing, enemy shaping, chasing, and devouring. It can absorb the Tao controlled by the land within the net and transform it into chasing monsters. They are endless, ebbing and flowing. Unless one uses powerful force to directly tear apart the net laid by the seeker, defeat is inevitable. During the three sages' deduction, a seeker's net suddenly appeared in the Xuanji ring. When the sages touched it with their divine thought, they instantly understood its general principle. So, the scene of the Taichu immortal realm I saw was indeed a past scene of mountain and sea. And those endlessly appearing monsters chasing me originated from those powerful beings previously devoured by the seeker. Fang Kun nodded slightly. The troublesome thing is that these fierce creatures, in addition to their own divine abilities from their previous lives, also possess various combined abilities. Furthermore, as time passes, they gradually manifest the abilities of those who enter them. Just like fellow Taoist Fang Kun. As the sages discussed, they reached a conclusion. To break the seeker's net, one either infiltrates along the spiritual vein into the front mountain and sea with minimal consumption, almost starting with the strength of their true self. Before the seeker's net's devouring power spreads, they directly tear the net apart with brute force. Or, one is a heaven-defying genius, always able to find a way out of desperate situations, and even grow stronger with each battle. They transform the endless pursuit brought by the seeker's net into an opportunity for self-refinement. According to the three sages, such strong individuals indeed existed in the early days of mountain and sea, gradually proving their Tao to the peak of mountain and sea through fierce battles. It's just a pity that the current sages of mountain and sea do not seem to possess such characteristics. There is also a third method. A divine weapon descending from the heavens, detached from the mundane. Infiltrating with power not from mountain and sea, exceeding the seeker's sensing range. For things beyond its cognition, the seeker's enemy sensing net cannot see or hear, so naturally, there will be no corresponding chasing monsters evolving. Detached from mountain and sea. The sages all shook their heads upon hearing this, not believing it to be true. They merely regarded it as one ethereal possibility of deduction. Li Fan also maintained such a posture, not showing any change in expression. He wondered if the three sages intentionally brought this up as a test. But Li Fan pretended not to know. He quietly watched the sages display their various divine abilities. For a moment, there seemed to be no good way to break the situation. Tai Sage's expression shifted slightly, as if he intended to personally take action. Just then, a ray of light traversed mountain and sea, descending upon the other shore. It was Taiwei Sacred Emperor. In this era, due to Li Fan's existence, several resurrections were unusually smooth. In addition, with the infusion of true spirits, the sages' reliance on the Grand Lux sacred medicine also became increasingly small. Taiwei Sacred Emperor was definitely one of the sages who benefited the most. Perhaps I can try this seeker's killing game. Li Fan was slightly stunned upon hearing this. Not only him, but all the other shore sages were also like this. From Taiwei Sacred Emperor's simple sentence, they sensed a subtle disharmony and strangeness. But for a moment, they couldn't figure out what was strange about it. All eyes converged on Taiwei's sacred emperor. After a long while, a clear light surged within the Xuanji ring. Everyone was startled, and then they reacted. Has fellow Taoist Taiwei made a big breakthrough? Taiwei's sacred emperor nodded in response. Previously, when Taiwei's sacred emperor faced the other shore sages, he only referred to himself as I, or we. He did not put on the airs of a sacred emperor. Upon meeting today, he referred to himself as Gen, a royal, I. The most crucial thing was that at first, the other shore sages didn't feel anything wrong, only instinctively sensing a slight strangeness. It seemed they had unconsciously acknowledged that the other party indeed deserved the titles of Sacred Emperor and Gen. Without explaining the breakthrough opportunity, Taiwei's Sacred Emperor merely looked towards the front mountain and sea and said solemnly, "Everyone, behold my methods." With that, his figure dispersed into thousands of light particles, hiding within the mountain and sea spiritual veins, flowing upstream. Taiwei actually didn't rely on the reincarnation lucky ones for contact, but rather his true self directly fragmented his power to infiltrate. Bai Xiao said in surprise. When did he gain such an understanding of the Tao of mountain and sea beings? The discovery of the mountain and sea beings' spiritual veins was under the watchful eyes of all sages. Logically speaking, Taiwei's sacred emperor should not have undergone such a change. After a moment of silence, it was Lianshan sage who revealed the mystery with a single sentence. So that's how it is. The Holy Dynasty citizens occupy a significant portion of the mountain and sea beings. Naturally, there are descendants of Chu Tianwei among them. The thoughts and everything of the Holy Dynasty citizens, even their bodies and spirits, are all under Taiwei's control. Previously, he was unaware of the existence of the mountain and sea being connection. Hence, he saw nothing. Now that we have pointed out the connection, among the Holy Dynasty citizens, there are no less than 10,000 descendants of Chu Tianwei. All are like Taiwei's incarnations, and their efficiency in comprehension is more than 100 times higher than ours. With such a change, it's not surprising. Bai Xiao sighed with emotion, muttering softly, "We're used to seeing Taiwei as a pill refiner, but we've forgotten his original identity as a sacred emperor." Gui Hai sage saw that the sages all had somewhat strange expressions, naturally understanding what was on everyone's minds. He chuckled lightly. Taiwei's sacred emperor was able to create a vast and prosperous holy dynasty from nothing. His talent and feelings are truly extraordinary. However, before, he was burdened by our need for grand luck sacred medicine. But with fellow Taoist Zhou Hui's help, he doesn't need to consume so much medicine, and Taiwei can focus more of his energy on cultivation. Perhaps this is his rightful Tao fruit. Lianshan sage said indifferently, Taiwei never speaks falsehoods. Since he has spoken, it means he has full confidence. Let's see how he breaks the situation. Following Lianshan sage's words, a beam of light shone from the holy dynasty in mountain and sea, reaching the other shore. It was Taiwei's sacred emperor's true self, sharing the scenes he sensed. After a period of flowing against the current, Taiwei had successfully entered the front mountain and sea and was captured by the seeker's net. Perhaps it was precisely because of the insights into the Tao of mountain and sea beings gained from over 10,000 lucky ones that Taiwei's sacred emperor's consumption while moving through the mountain and sea spiritual veins was almost negligible. This formed a stark contrast to the arduous progress of Thief of Opportunities, Bai Xiao, and Fang Kun earlier. Seeing such a start, all the sages were deeply shaken. Looking closely, the first thing Taiwei's sacred emperor did upon entering the front mountain and sea with almost full strength greatly surprised everyone. Facing the first wave of fierce creatures that rushed to kill him as soon as he arrived, Taiwei's sacred emperor actually voluntarily dispersed all his cultivation. The sudden drop in the target's strength caused those originally ferocious monsters to pause. Because the disparity in strength between them was too great, easily killing them did not conform to the rules followed by the seeker's devouring net. So, after a brief stagnation, the first wave of manifested monsters dispersed like a wisp of smoke. Then, perhaps after re-evaluating Taiwei's sacred emperor's strength, they fell into a brief silence. Fellow Taoist Taiwei's move is brilliant. To solve the situation, one cannot be led by the nose. This first preemptive strike invisibly disrupted the seeker's net's devouring rules. It's just, I wonder, with fellow Taoist Taiwei's cultivation gone, how will he survive in such a dangerous world? Fellow Taoist Taiwei must have a brilliant plan. We just need to wait patiently and see. Taiwei's sacred emperor's voluntary dispersal of his cultivation was, of course, premeditated. It was a retreat, and also an advance. It was not a futile dissipation of power, but rather a proactive attack. Taking advantage of the Seeker's Net's re-layout interval, Taiwei's sacred emperor used his dispersed cultivation to enlighten several surrounding beings. There were pure martial artists who exuded fierce aura, and strategists whose eyes gleamed with wisdom. There were also a large number of ignorant and fearless soldiers. In just an instant, a small-scale, holy dynasty, suddenly took shape. With the sacred emperor's control over the mountain and sea holy dynasty for countless years, manipulating this group of people under his command was as easy as turning his hand. They protected the sacred emperor, who had no cultivation and was powerless, in the center, and began to battle the first wave of fierce creatures that charged in. They were called fierce creatures, but only for ordinary mortals. In front of this army enlightened by Taiwei's sacred emperor, they were no match. Like slaughtering chickens and dogs, they instantly defeated the enemy. Of the first wave of Seeker's Net fierce creatures, 1/3 were killed, 1/3 were absorbed by the Holy Dynasty generals and transformed into their own power. And 1/3 were enlightened and recruited, joining the Holy Dynasty army. The sacred emperor, seemingly having anticipated this, sat steadily within the army, his expression calm and composed, waiting for the arrival of the next wave of enemies. Meanwhile, the surrounding other shore sages were mostly surprised. Can it be done this way? The fierce creatures evolved by the Seeker's Net's devouring rules are all based on the cultivation of the target within it. They are always just a little stronger, in order to completely drain the potential through struggle. But now, fellow Taoist Taiwei is only at the mortal level, yet he is surrounded by a group of extremely fierce soldiers protecting him. Doesn't this mean he is in an invincible position? It's not that simple. The Seeker's Net will definitely change very soon. Even if Taiwei's true self is weak, the soldiers he controls are also part of his strength. However, having seized 2 preemptive moves, fellow Taoist Taiwei has hope of breaking the situation. The sages could not help but become more expectant, their gaze continuing to focus on the scene in the field. Just as the sages had anticipated, after temporarily halting its attack, the Seeker's Net quickly changed again. The strength of the second wave of enemy creatures generated was significantly stronger than the first wave. They were almost on par with the Holy Dynasty generals. The two sides engaged in a bloody battle, which ultimately ended in a tragic victory for the Holy Dynasty. The army that Taiwei's sacred emperor had just managed to assemble was already left with less than 1/5 alive. The speed of the Seeker's Net's changes and adjustments was truly somewhat beyond expectation. And its principle remained to keep the enemy in the net in a half-dead, struggling state. Though seemingly frustrated, Taiwei's sacred emperor looked up at the sky, a faint smile appearing on his face. The Seeker's Net did not give much time for rest. The Holy Dynasty generals had barely rested for a moment when the third wave of enemies arrived. But the situation on the field suddenly became somewhat strange. Although the third wave of enemies was clearly stronger than the second wave, the Holy Dynasty generals, however, did not find it as difficult to deal with. If the previous battle was a life-and-death struggle of equal strength, then this battle was even a slight advantage. How could this be? The sages were all stunned. But after careful observation, they instantly discovered the mystery. It turned out that at the beginning of this battle, Taiwei's sacred emperor personally came to the front line. Wherever the dragon banner went, everything boiled over. The soldiers, already fearless of death, were now even more bloodthirsty. Their aura was like a rainbow, with the sacred emperor at the head, like a long dragon, easily piercing through the enemy formation. The previously stalemated situation changed dramatically because the sacred emperor, who should have been seated in the rear, personally appeared on the battlefield. It turned into a massive crushing victory. This battle was a great victory, making up for the previous losses. The army quickly adjusted and replenished itself. And after Taiwei's sacred emperor gave the customary commendations, he returned to the rear again. Taiwei's sacred emperor still took nothing from the gains of this battle, distributing everything to his generals. With the body of a mortal, he commanded endless fierce creatures. Taiwei's sacred emperor was still at ease. He looked into the distance, quietly awaiting the arrival of the next wave of enemies. Another step 1. Fellow Taoist Taiwei is incredible. It seems that in the past, we truly underestimated fellow Taoist Taiwei. This time, with the battlefield as a chessboard, playing against the Seeker, he truly revealed his strength. Bai Xiao couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Li Fan had also been an emperor. He naturally saw the subtle brilliance of Taiwei's strategy. The fierce creatures evolved by the Seeker's Net must follow rules. But the strength of the Holy Dynasty generals commanded by Taiwei is an existence that is difficult to specifically estimate and calculate. Its greatest variable is Taiwei's Sacred Emperor himself. The Sacred Emperor's personal presence, what an increase in the overall morale and combat power of the Holy Dynasty generals, more than double. Such an estimate by the Seeker's Net would greatly underestimate their combat power. And whether the Sacred Emperor appears on the front line or not is entirely up to his own will. I don't think even the three sages can predict it. The Seeker is also like this. And if, based on the situation where the Holy Dynasty general's morale is at its peak, the strength of the attacking fierce creatures is set, I'm afraid that would be exactly what Taiwei's Sacred Emperor wants. Li Fan's heart stirred, and what happened next in the field corresponded to his thoughts. This time, the attacking enemies were determined based on the peak morale achieved by the Holy Dynasty generals under the Sacred Emperor's encouragement. With Taiwei's Sacred Emperor not showing his face, the Holy Dynasty generals fought an extremely difficult battle. The strength they had just recovered was almost completely lost. Elite generals, less than 1 in 100 remained. Although they ultimately won, it was a tragic victory. Why didn't fellow Taoist Taiwei appear on the front line? If he had repeated his old trick, this battle would never have been so difficult. The casualties are too heavy. The advantages accumulated earlier are lost in one go. While the sages were discussing, Thief of Opportunities suddenly spoke out. Excellent, excellent. If the Seeker's Net no longer changes, I think this situation is broken. The sages were stunned and all asked for the reason. Thief of Opportunities excitedly said, unlike fighting between ordinary cultivators, those who can survive in such a brutal war are all 1 in a million elites. With equal strength, in a life-and-death desperate situation, they can unleash several, even dozens of times their power. Fellow Taoist Taiwei's battle seems to have suffered heavy losses, but in reality, it's like sifting sand in a great wave, refining true gold. This is only a few battles. If such a situation can be maintained after 100 battles, one can stand against 10, or even 100, without a problem. If you add the change of Taiwei himself commanding the front line. If the Seeker's Net does not change its rules, it will surely be broken. 1743. Mountains and Seas Devour. Chapter 1729. The beginning of Mountain and Sea to Devour. Just as the saints had foreseen, the net's repeated impacts, like refining gold with fire, slowly forged a veritable army of 100 battles. Fewer than 100 soldiers who survived from the very beginning remained. However, the combat power they could display in such a desperate situation could not be judged by their usual state. Each time, they could take on 100, erupting with astonishing and terrifying power. With these elites among elites as the core, the Holy Dynasty generals slowly expanded into an invincible legion. The middle force of the legion consisted of soldiers with slightly lower combat talent, but compared to the 100 battle elites, they were numerous. Overall, their contribution to the war was even greater. Next were the most numerous, the most expendable, and the ordinary soldiers who could be quickly replenished after the war. Like layers of filters, they slowly dissolved the impact brought by the net. At the same time, they filtered out a mighty army that became increasingly composed in combat and response. Even if Taiwei's Sacred Emperor was still in his mortal state, as long as he sat in the army, no one in this immortal realm could harm him. From his arrival, Taiwei's Sacred Emperor had not displayed any special divine ability of his own. Relying entirely on the inherent principles of this Taichu immortal realm and his experience of governing as an emperor for countless years, he not only successfully survived. He was even on the verge of establishing himself as king within the net that the net had painstakingly woven. According to the existing rules set by the net, it should no longer be able to take down the Taiwei's Sacred Emperor, whose power had already solidified. Even if more creations evolved later, they would only become resources for the growth of the Holy Dynasty army. The net could not fail to understand this point. So, this predator quickly decided to reweave its hunting net. In this Taichu immortal realm, the pervasive killing chi instantly vanished. In the quiet of heaven and earth, all things ceased to operate. At the same time, some new rules seemed to be brewing. With the net's ability, even a change of course would only take a moment. The opportunity was fleeting, precisely the breakthrough opportunity Taiwei's Sacred Emperor had been waiting for. In the Holy Dynasty army, Taiwei's Sacred Emperor, who had been sitting with his eyes closed, suddenly rose. He looked at the thousands of generals surrounding him, expressionless. He only asked one question. "Generals, are you willing to die for us?" Although the voice was soft, in the ears of the Holy Dynasty generals, it was like thunderclaps. There was no hesitation, no defiance. All the soldiers instantly knelt, roaring in unison. Yes, yes, yes. The generals' thunderous voices still echoed in the sky of the Taichu Immortal realm. Their bodies had already transformed into thousands of blood-red lights, surging towards the central Taiwei sacred emperor. 100 battle-strong army of the Holy Dynasty thus disappeared. However, the aura on Taiwei's sacred emperor's body expanded infinitely at an astonishing speed. One must know that when Taiwei's sacred emperor first arrived, his strength had not suffered much loss. After a fierce battle, he had even absorbed a large amount of nourishment from this Taichu Immortal realm. However, these powers were previously scattered among thousands of soldiers. Now, all power gathered again, returning to Taiwei's sacred emperor. A mountain and sea saint suddenly descended. He wore a long robe, imperial black, adorned with thousands of golden dragons. A 12-tiered emperor's crown, with jade bead curtains hanging before his forehead, could not conceal the sharp glint that suddenly erupted in Taiwei's sacred emperor's eyes. At this moment, the net was in the interstice of rule changes, and Taiwei's sacred emperor waved his large sleeve. The sun and moon sewn on the edge of his robe instantly surged with frantic chi. Heaven and earth changed color because of it. It was as if Taiwei's sacred emperor had at this moment tightly grasped the mysterious existence hidden behind the net, and then ripped it apart with all his might. The world twisted, and then shattered inch by inch. Among the other shore, the light and shadow seen by the saints suddenly dimmed. Then, like a firefly, it flickered and struggled for a few moments, finally extinguishing helplessly. The beam of light projected from the Taiwei sacred dynasty also vanished instantly. This is. The saints were startled, looking towards where Taiwei's sacred emperor was. Taiwei has worked hard this time, Lianshan Saint said, simultaneously transmitting a stream of qi. Li Fan also saw that when the net revealed its true form, Taiwei's sacred emperor's incarnation was instantly swallowed, and his main body also seemed to be heavily injured. Immediately, he conveniently transferred a mass of stagnant true spirit. The net has always had a fearsome reputation in the beginning of mountain and sea. It is normal for Taiwei's clone to be instantly defeated when he goes there, Lianshan Saint said calmly, not finding it surprising. Although Taiwei ultimately failed, he did cause the net, hiding behind the net, to show signs. This point is crucial. It is the key for us to break the situation. Gui Hai Saint said, and light again illuminated the Xuanji ring. It was what happened in that instant just before the net was torn apart and the Taichu Immortal realm returned to darkness. Restored by Gui Hai Saint, though somewhat blurry. One could still see a figure, seemingly hovering outside the world, looking down at Zhang Sheng within the net. At the edges of the figure, thousands of shadowy tentacles, like spider legs, drifted irregularly. It was originally high above, but because the equally hidden net it devoured was torn, it appeared somewhat flustered. Although the net has the ability to devour mountain and sea, it is destined to only hide in the shadows and cannot appear before others. Once exposed, not only will its own abilities be greatly affected, but even its extraordinary ability to devour mountain and sea will be greatly reduced in a short period. Gui Hai Saint explained the reason for the net's panic. Seeing some confusion among the saints, he added, it can be seen as a drawback brought by its ability to devour mountain and sea. In the beginning of mountain and sea, most powerful individuals have similar weaknesses. The reason for this is the backlash that comes from attempting to evolve one's Tao to the extreme, beyond mountain and sea. Gui Hai Saint seemed unwilling to elaborate on this, only mentioning it briefly. Then he refocused on the captured image. Hey, it seems the net is not that decisive after all, daring to send its true body to the mid to late mountain and sea, where Tao annihilation rages. The net before us is not its true complete form. It is a clone that has gathered most of its power. With such a degree of withdrawal, the net in the beginning of mountain and sea probably cannot do anything and can only go into seclusion. For the net, it can also be called a desperate gamble. It seemed they had discovered something, and the three saints' words became teasing and much more relaxed. Mountain and sea are one. Since it has been exposed here, then at this moment in the beginning of mountain and sea, someone already knows its weakened state. It won't be long before it will be forced to leave. Lianshan added, from my understanding of it, it must be hesitating between returning and not returning at this moment. We just need to press it further, and the siege of mountain and sea ahead will surely be lifted. Upon hearing this, the saints immediately breathed a sigh of relief. And with the previous probes by Thief of Opportunities, Bai Xiao, Feng Kun, and Tai Wei, the net's true nature was basically clear. They were naturally not so resistant to becoming the next lucky ones. Thus, amidst the vast starlight, the next to be captured by Chu Tianhui's mountain and sea life Dao was Li Fan, 1744, Cable Network Fission. Chapter 1730, The Splitting and Transformation of the Great Net. Li Fan's expression was a little subtle, but he did not refuse. My abilities are far inferior to fellow Taoist Tai Wei. Moreover, with the repeated changes in the Great Net's rules, I'm afraid it won't last much longer. Gui Hai Saint said, since the net has been exposed, it will surely flee far away soon. What we need to do now is to delay it as much as possible, ensuring the safety of the mountain and sea's Tao of living beings before it leaves. Fellow Taoist Zhou Wei, there's no need to worry. Just go ahead. Even if you fail, we will quickly take over, Shou Chu said with a chuckle. Li Fan cupped his hands, then split off a strand of his will and followed the perceived mountain and sea My Luo veins channels. Upon entering, he understood why Thief of Opportunities and others had suffered such severe damage to their strength when traversing it earlier. The mountain and sea My Luo veins channels involving the foundational existence of mountain and sea is a secret among secrets. It possesses an instinctive and strong repulsion towards all external matters. One could only use that familiar wisp of connection to the mountain and sea living beings as a rope, trying their best to retain a portion of their strength. Although Li Fan was certainly not like Tai Wei's sacred emperor, who, with the help of the Holy Dynasty's myriad people, could traverse with nearly full strength. But under the enhancement of shared heart nature and Daoda, he shared insights with Shou Chu and Daoda. His performance was much better than that of Thief of Opportunities and others. With strength close to that of a nameless true immortal, he successfully descended into the great net. And like Tai Wei's sacred emperor, his main body projected the scenes he experienced into the Xuanji ring for the saints to observe. Fellow Taoist Zhou Hui's comprehension ability is indeed extraordinary. The beginning is quite good, he should be able to hold the net for a while, Tai Saint said with a slight nod. Li Fan and the other two communicated deep within their hearts. If it's our turn to appear next, we must hide our true abilities. Otherwise, if our performance is the same, it might arouse suspicion. Let's say, the moment Li Fan successfully arrived at the primordial immortal realm woven by the net, he felt the dense killing intent pervading the heavens and earth. He had naturally been intimately familiar with this malevolent killing intent of heaven and earth since he had comprehended a formless killing intent during his foundation establishment and used it to feign heavenly mandate. He merely frowned slightly and had already grown accustomed to it. With Tai Wei's sacred emperor's precedent, Li Fan also learned to directly disperse his cultivation at the start, lowering his cultivation to the level of immortal. However, Tai Wei used the cultivation he dispersed, combined with countless years of imperial experience, to forge an immortal army. But Li Fan, he proactively gave his cultivation to the monsters that were slowly appearing around him and charging towards him. He actually committed an act of aiding the enemy the moment he appeared. What is fellow Taoist Zhou Wei doing? He actually proactively gave his cultivation to the enemy. As immortal, how can he survive the ensuing encirclement? Such an anomaly naturally drew the attention of the saints. And the subsequent anomaly that occurred among the swarm of fierce creatures revealed the reason for Li Fan's actions. The fierce creatures, originally united in their goal to kill Li Fan. However, due to the cultivation Li Fan proactively offered, they developed disagreements. All those who accepted Li Fan's gift instantly replaced Li Fan as the primary target of the fierce creatures' encirclement. Although it was an evolution of the Great Net, when their own lives were threatened, they would not simply sit and wait for death. Thus, they began to fight amongst themselves. After encountering Tai Wei's sacred emperor, the Great Net underwent a change in its rules. The strength of the first wave of fierce creatures was determined by Li Fan's realm at the moment of his descent. Even if Li Fan proactively dispersed his cultivation, the monsters that evolved around him still maintained their corresponding level. It was only when Li Fan gave away this cultivation, and not in any way to strengthen himself, that the strength of the second wave of fierce creatures began to decrease and sink. However, this created a fatal problem. Among the first wave of attacking fierce creatures, those who accepted Li Fan's gift and turned against the Great Net still maintained the strength of a nameless true immortal. Facing these newly appeared fellows, they hesitated for only a moment before quickly raising their butcher's knives again. It was not a battle of the same level of combat power, and they were quickly slaughtered. In the sky of the great net, it seemed as if time stood still for a moment. It was as if another rule was forced to be rewritten in that instant. The rules changed again, a rare moment of quiet. Li Fan, however, proactively approached the fierce creatures that were between him and the great net. Having accepted the gift from Li Fan, an outsider, even if it was forced, they were destined not to be tolerated by the great net. They appeared quite wary of the arrival of Li Fan, their benefactor. However, perhaps because they had received his gift, they did not directly attack. Our lives are now one, we must overcome this calamity together. Although you were created by this heaven and earth, by receiving my creation, you have gained the opportunity to break free from your shackles. You are no longer the same as those fierce creatures who only knew how to kill. Li Fan paid no mind to the fierce creatures who were once ignorant, his expression calm, as he explained the entire cause and effect to them. Like an enlightenment lecture, the expressions on the faces of the various fierce creatures changed repeatedly in a short period. Some found it difficult to accept, some were thoughtful. There were also those who were wholeheartedly convinced, regarding Li Fan as their esteemed teacher. May I ask, teacher, where is our path forward now? Li Fan looked up at the sky, smiled, and pointed, saying, scheme against this heaven with me. The fierce creatures had not yet understood the meaning of Li Fan's words when the third wave of fierce creatures was already born. After the rules changed again, those rebellious beings were now considered part of Li Fan's strength. Therefore, the strength of the newly born fierce creatures returned to the realm of a nameless true immortal. You have seen it, we are now one body, prospering and suffering together. Listening to my command is your only chance of survival. If I disappear, you will surely be purged as well. The enlightened beings were not foolish. From the current situation within the great net, they quickly understood that what Li Fan said was true. Even though there was an inexplicable feeling of resentment in their hearts, they could only temporarily unite against the common enemy. They vented all their anger on the enemy. However, the enemies evolved by the great net also took into account the bonuses of morale and hard nature. This battle was still fought to a standstill. More than half of the newly submitted enlightened beings were directly lost. The only thing beneficial to Li Fan was that, for the great net, eliminating these traitors was even more important than killing him. So, before the enlightened beings were completely annihilated, he was actually safe. After a bloody battle, he didn't even stretch his muscles and bones. He just occasionally looked up at the sky, seemingly observing something. Li Fan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he coldly snorted in his heart. Within a short period, it has changed several times. All changes must have traces to follow. Even the beings of the beginning of mountain and sea cannot escape this principle. Li Fan was intensely deducing in his mind. The scene of the primordial immortal realm, the world before him, seemed to recede like a curtain, revealing its core, a large net woven horizontally and vertically. Although this net was woven by you, how do you know it cannot be used by me? Li Fan slowly extended 2 fingers towards the sky. 1745. Swallowing Mountains and Seas. Chapter 1731. The Art of Devouring Mountains and Seas. Like plucking a zither, Li Fan tried to touch and then change the rules of this world with his 2 fingers. Weave a giant net with the power of devouring mountains and seas. Evolve it into a world, forcing the creatures within to fight with all their might, to the death. When a creature falls in the net, it will instinctively absorb it. Li Fan looked at the 2 sides locked in a death match on the battlefield again. It was as if after they perished, one light orb after another floated out. Each represented the principles and creations mastered by the life forms on the battlefield before their deaths. Perhaps not all, but certainly the most essential essence, under the extreme desperation of life and death, where all potential was unleashed. On the mountains of corpses and seas of blood created by the great battle, countless light orbs of varying sizes rose and floated into the net in the heavens and earth. This scene was indescribably eerie. Li Fan seemed to be mesmerized, repeatedly plucking his fingers, trying to change the direction of the light orbs. He failed repeatedly but never gave up. Until the end of this great battle, although Li Fan had not succeeded once, a sense of confidence gradually emerged in his eyes. As usual, he took nothing for himself. He only distributed what he had recovered after the death battle to those enlightened creatures. The remaining enlightened creatures were not overly grateful to Li Fan. They simply seized every opportunity to recover and strengthen themselves. As native inhabitants of this world, they clearly knew that the upcoming battles would inevitably be more brutal than the last, until they were completely annihilated. However, the instinct for survival did not allow them to give up just like that. Even if there was only a glimmer of hope, they had to keep fighting. This is the attribute that Net bestows upon them. It has nothing to do with my incitement. It also makes things convenient for me. Before the enlightened creatures had fully rested, the next wave of enemies had already arrived. Defend against the enemy according to the formation. Li Fan's divine thought spread out like ripples. In the minds of the enlightened creatures, a mysterious formation instantly appeared simultaneously. Although they found it difficult to comprehend its principles, it did not prevent them from entering the formation in order. With Li Fan as the core hub of the formation, all enlightened creatures were connected as one. Killing intent condensed, forming a blood cloud, rising into the sky and obscuring the firmament. This formation was created by Li Fan based on the Xuanji Ring's characteristic of unity of heart and mind. Under the blessing of the Great Formation, the enlightened creatures shared senses, as if they were one body. Although there was no increase in their strength or realm, it invisibly brought countless death warriors together into a whole. There was no need to worry about being attacked from behind. The support of their companions always appeared at the most opportune moment. From fighting individually to automatically dividing into countless small groups to efficiently encircle and annihilate the enemy. The situation on the battlefield instantly changed. What was originally a duel of equals turned into a one-sided slaughter due to the appearance of this formation. Li Fan had long anticipated this situation and his attention remained focused on the sky of this world. Thank you, teacher, for bestowing the Tao. Only after the victory, when the enlightened creatures shouted in unison, did he slightly shift his gaze. There are defeated remnants, you may devour them. Li Fan pointed to the bloody battlefield and said faintly. All the enlightened creatures were slightly startled. But they were born as evolved creations meant for death matches, so they were not so particular. Upon hearing Li Fan's command, they immediately began to feast. Soon, the messy battlefield was cleaned up. The remnants of the battlefield, apart from being able to slightly fill their stomachs, seemed to be of no great use. Most of the enlightened creatures were like this. However, there were a few exceptions. You. Come over. Li Fan pointed, and 3 to 5 figures quickly flew to Li Fan's front. They knelt respectfully. Although Li Fan outwardly still had the cultivation of a mortal, the faint aura that unconsciously emanated from him made them instinctively feel a sense of trembling and submission. They dared not be presumptuous in the slightest. So that's how it is. After observing for a long time, Li Fan suddenly uttered this sentence, though it was unclear what he had seen. A moment later, one of the kneeling figures suddenly exploded without warning, shattering into pieces of flesh and blood. You all consume it, Li Fan commanded the remaining figures. Their bodies trembled slightly, but they did not hesitate, eagerly devouring it. Only this time, as they ate, Li Fan's fingers occasionally glided slowly through the void realm. It seemed like he was touching, and yet also like he was playing a musical instrument. With the flesh and blood in their stomachs, these kneeling figures were all strengthened to varying degrees. And at this moment, the next wave of enemies had already arrived. Kill. Without unnecessary words, Li Fan gave a single command, and the enlightened creations once again collided with the ferocious creatures of the net. This time, Li Fan did not gain an advantage. The strength of the newly evolved creations had clearly accounted for the formation's blessing of unity of heart and mind. Their strength was more than a notch stronger than the previous wave of enemies. However, the enlightened creatures' previous act of devouring flesh and blood, which gave them some slight reinforcement, was not included in this calculation. This led to Li Fan's side still holding a slight advantage in the situation. And furthermore, as the slaughter was in full swing, Li Fan's thoughts echoed endlessly again. The enlightened creatures were astonished to discover that as enemies fell, faint, indescribable power was captured and absorbed by them. Some merely increased their chi and blood and cultivation. Others, however, contained fleeting insights and memories of divine abilities and Tao arts. Though the enlightened creatures were initially ignorant, their intelligence grew with time after Li Fan's enlightenment. They were naturally skilled in divine abilities in combat. Without Li Fan actively teaching them, many of them instantly comprehended the memories. Even the few who remained unclear quickly grasped the mysteries from their companions through shared insights. From a simple contest of power and chi and blood, divine abilities gradually began to manifest. The battle quickly ended. If it was only a slight advantage at first, Then after the enlightened creatures all awakened their divine abilities, it became a crushing victory again. The enlightened creatures, having gained benefits, were like wolves and tigers, scrambling for the remnants left on the battlefield. However, there was too little meat and too many wolves, simply not enough to share. Thus, they began to anticipate the next wave of enemies more than ever before. A peculiar emotion and atmosphere lingered and grew in their hearts. After the initial confusion, they quickly understood. This was the good fortune Li Fan had brought them. So they all respectfully knelt down to show their reverence and submission. Rise. I don't need your kneeling. What I need is to tear this sky apart with me. Li Fan pointed at the net's sky curtain and said faintly. It was as if an unresolvable emotion was accumulating in his heart. After a moment of dead silence, the enlightened creatures all roared towards the sky. For a time, their voices shook the universe and pierced the clouds. At the same time, in the sky, a shadow seemed to flash by. Then, endless dark clouds began to gather. The wind gradually rose, and thunder rumbled. This was the net's response. The enlightened creature army's strength had indeed greatly increased, but as long as it did not exceed the net's tolerable limit, the net could always create enemies that matched it. The next wave of evolved ferocious creatures was indeed much stronger than the previous one. This made the recently strengthened enlightened creatures almost feel as if they had not become stronger at all. Without Li Fan's guidance, they spontaneously began to try their best to absorb and strengthen themselves during the battle. And in Li Fan's eyes, within the vast net of this world, another small net seemed to be weaving and gathering. It's not enough, Li Fan observed for a long time, then suddenly uttered this sentence. So he added more fuel to the fire. You are inherently chaos and ignorant. Thus, you can kill enemies by instinct, but you will ultimately fail to achieve minor achievement. I have a Tao that can be passed down to Zhang Sheng. Absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth to gather your qi. Borrow the wonders of heaven and earth to build your Tao foundation. As Li Fan spoke sentence after sentence, the countless enlightened creatures present, their gazes towards the surrounding net world quietly changed. It was like seeing the original battlefield wreckage. Everywhere was fragrant and enticingly delicious. This world was created by the net imitating its previous devouring of the primordial immortal realm. It could truly be said that wonders were everywhere, and treasures were abundant. However, they all turned into cultivation resources for the enlightened creatures. Devouring mountains and seas, who wouldn't know how to do that? If it doesn't change, even with the foundation of the primordial immortal realm, it will only end up like the Xuanwang world of old. Li Fan looked on with cold eyes. Although he borrowed the name of the Xuanwang Chuan Fa of the past, it was not actually the same cultivation method. The reason why the enlightened creatures could truly devour this world successfully was entirely due to Li Fan's deconstruction of the net before him. The essence of the net was another concretization of the net's previous devouring of the mountain and sea. With Huan Zhen in hand, Li Fan witnessed countless changes in the mountain and sea's reality and illusion. Especially with Shou Chu and Daoda's blessing of unity of heart and mind, his comprehension of the change of truth and falsehood, if not having reached the inner sanctum, could definitely be considered a preliminary minor achievement. One must know that Shou Chu once, with a single thought, obliterated thousands of Saint Emperor's void realm incarnations, and he could also become a Saint Emperor through the illusory form of the mountain and sea. Since this world originated from the mountain and sea, it was not so difficult for Li Fan to deconstruct it. The difficulty was finding that net hidden behind the scenes. So Li Fan had been waiting for the net to rewrite the rules again. Change, and a flaw emerges. From being able to only devour evolved ferocious creatures, to leaping to being able to devour the world itself. The meaning represented by this was completely different. The net, which possessed the ability to devour mountains and seas, naturally understood this principle. As Li Fan said, if it did not change the rules and allowed these enlightened creatures to continue their mischief, this net would probably soon fall apart. Representing the will of the net, a drastic change suddenly occurred in the heavens and earth. Tens of thousands of lightning bolts appeared simultaneously, instantly illuminating the dim world. The lightning did not flash and disappear, it merely seemed to be frozen, gradually filling the firmament. Like cracks, and like threads, dense and numerous, covering the sky. A moment later, endless creatures poured out from these cracks. Their targets were all Li Fan and his enlightened creation army. Even if they did not know what fear was, the enlightened creations could not help but feel their bodies stiffen at this sight. It was truly as their teacher had said, they had torn open the sky. But, The number of enemies appearing simultaneously was simply too great. In the face of such terrifying numerical disparity, no matter how much they struggled, they would probably be easily crushed into pieces. What good is it now? It's just a desperate struggle. Killing one is breaking even, killing two is a huge profit. As their spirits were being shaken, Li Fan's voice echoed in their hearts again. This made them barely regain their composure. They retreated to a defensive line, gathered in one place, and jointly faced the surging enemy. However, the power of the two sides was too disparate. The enlightened creation army collapsed at the first touch. This was no longer the net's normal forced death match and subsequent absorption. Instead, it had become a thorough cleansing. Li Fan ignored the enlightened creation army rapidly disappearing around him. He even ignored the ferocious creatures of the net that were about to attack him. I finally found you. A cold light appeared in his eyes, and his actions were exactly the same as what Taiwei's sacred emperor had done earlier. He stretched out his hands and tore forcefully. But it was not merely imitating the sacred emperor's actions. The sacred emperor's desperate strike only exposed the net hidden behind the scenes. But Li Fan's true purpose was to scrape off a few pieces of flesh from him. Not for the mountain and sea, but for himself. The first saint emperor of the mountain and sea, I wonder how his Tao differs from today. Devouring mountains and seas, this Tao, it suits my intentions perfectly. With the void realm separated by a vast distance, they were only connected by the mountain and sea's My Luo. The saints in the Xuanji ring on the other shore saw everything through the images transmitted by Li Fan. Li Fan was not afraid of exposing his own secrets at all. With a single thought, truth and falsehood shifted. Since you're here, don't leave. Li Fan, with his mortal body, was so small and insignificant amidst the monstrous tide of billions of creatures. But without him seeming to do anything, all the monsters that approached him disappeared in an instant. As if they were erased by an invisible force. Without exception. And as Li Fan slowly strolled and gradually ascended to the heavens. In the monstrous dark clouds, a long, huge great void appeared with his steps. No matter how fearless they were set to be, witnessing such a bizarre scene, the net's evolved creations instinctively felt a hint of resistance, unwilling to foolishly rush forward to their deaths. Aside from the shock of the instantaneous erasure by the change of truth and falsehood, the fundamental reason was their creator. The net also simultaneously felt a hint of dread. Even the power of devouring mountains and seas would dissipate in an instant before the change of truth and falsehood. The net was a top predator, but also extremely cautious. Facing Li Fan, who was of unknown origin but wielded unimaginable divine abilities. Almost instantly, he had made a decision. Retreat. This mountain and sea could no longer be stayed in. Even a heavy loss was better than perishing. As if frozen time resumed, the electric light that had been frozen in the sky of this world slowly dissipated. The world began to fall apart, and the shadow hidden behind the scenes seemed to be moving away. As for those evolved ferocious creatures, they had already become a grand feast for the remaining enlightened creations. Teacher's divine ability is invincible, and he does not break his word. He truly led us to tear open this firmament. Their hearts were filled with excitement, and they hunted the surrounding evolved creatures with all their might. The strength of some evolved creatures was even far above theirs. But at this moment, they seemed to have lost their objective, merely standing still, dazed. Allowing themselves to be slaughtered and then devoured. Indeed, following the right person is very important. A nascent thought began to sprout in the minds of the enlightened creations. 1746. Return the favor. Chapter 1732. Returning the favor. In truth, with So's actual strength, if he had truly fought to the death with all his might, he would never have collapsed so quickly. Firstly, Li Fan attacked with the great path of truth and falsehood, and his performance was truly terrifying. The network of devouring that So had painstakingly arranged crumbled at a touch before Li Fan, without even the slightest power to resist. The gap between them seemed as vast as the heavens and earth. Under the unknown entanglement and overwhelming fear, So could not muster even a shred of battle intent. Secondly, So was not a current mountain and sea creature to begin with. He had only come to hunt for the great Tao of mountain and sea creatures. Even if the hunt was thwarted, it wouldn't cause him any substantial loss. But if he were to truly get entangled with a mysterious and dangerous person like Li Fan. Thief of opportunities, Bai Xiao, Feng Kun, Tai Wei, Li Fan. All those who entered the network this time came one after another, well prepared. Even if he defeated Li Fan, there might be even stronger individuals arriving later. Moreover, his existence had already been exposed, and this place was no longer suitable for him to stay. Various reasons combined, causing So to only care about escaping, with no intention of fighting. He allowed Li Fan to rampage freely within his network, as if entering an uninhabited land. Most of the Taichu immortal realm that So had painstakingly woven turned into cultivation resources for Li Fan and the creations he enlightened. The process of true as false erasing the traces of So's network was also the process of Li Fan comprehending its essence. Under normal circumstances, the mountain and sea was guarded by many saints. Even if Li Fan wanted to freely use the divine ability of true as false to verify his insights, he wouldn't have a suitable opportunity. But at this moment, Li Fan could use it without restraint, to his heart's content. Although the Taichu immortal realm was merely an illusion derived by So after devouring from the beginning of mountain and sea, its reality was still no less than the current mountain and sea. True as false continuously erased the surrounding scenery, and various mysterious insights continuously surged into Li Fan's mind. It was like a satisfying meal after a long hunger, an unprecedented sense of fulfillment enveloped Li Fan. As the saying goes, what is learned from books is ultimately shallow. To truly know something, one must practice it. Just knowing is indeed quite different from actually doing it. Even the shared memories of like-minded individuals cannot completely replace my personal involvement. I once experienced erasing countless illusory saints from Shochu's perspective, but that feeling was far less exhilarating than what I'm experiencing now. Since reincarnation, Li Fan had for the first time unleashed the power of true as false to his heart's content. While displaying his ultimate techniques, he did not forget his current goal. The hidden network gradually became fragmented, and so, the mountain and sea's first saint, hidden behind it, finally revealed his true form. He was not actually in a human form, but a huge, writhing, circular aggregation of shadowy mass. Innumerable tiny black tentacles encircled his body, occasionally manifesting fleeting glimpses of the mountain and sea scenes he had devoured. Upon seeing his appearance, Li Fan instinctively felt a sense of unease. It was as if the black shadow, through the touch of his gaze, had also infiltrated his body and begun to attempt corrosion. Li Fan snorted coldly, and with the change of truth and falsehood, instantly erased the influence brought by So. Change from the heart, also activated instantly. On the great Tao of returning to truth panel, thief of opportunities, enveloped in a multicolored glow, instantly lost its color. It became plain black and white, losing its profound charm. And in the real mountain and sea, Li Fan, at this moment, transformed from the Saint Zhou Wei into the Saint Thief of Opportunities. He looked at So, whose figure was gradually fading, and said coldly, "You steal my great Tao, and now you want to just leave. What you took from me, give it back." One of the myriad swaying shadowy tentacles around So's body suddenly burst open without warning at that moment. It transformed from an inky black into an equally cold gray. Then, as if losing control, it rushed into the other tentacles, wantonly plundering like a wolf and tiger. So had the ability to devour mountains and seas, but under the wanton plundering of this suddenly aggressive gray anomaly, he found it difficult to resist. He could only watch helplessly as the other party took away a part of his accumulated essence. Although on the surface both were devouring, their fundamental principles were essentially different. So's devouring of mountains and seas was like a predator hunting, a forceful seizure. And this gray, anomalous, cold aura, taking without permission is stealing. The suddenly uncontrolled gray aura within So's body was precisely that portion of the great Tao origin he had previously forcibly taken from the Saint Thief of Opportunities. It had already been swallowed by him, becoming a part of his own power. However, as the great path of truth and falsehood pressed him, So attempted to escape. Under the manipulation of Li Fan, who had transformed into the Saint Thief of Opportunities, this wisp of origin instantly lost control. It returned to Li Fan's embrace, and then in turn frantically plundered So's essence. Within So's body lay the accumulation of his countless years of arduous mountain and sea devouring. It was an absolute, undisputed treasure trove. Under normal circumstances, even the true thief of opportunities would not find it easy to steal the great Tao within it. But precisely now, the thief had entered the treasury. The most stringent outer defenses no longer needed to be considered, all that remained was to plunder as much as possible before the treasury moved. Although there were myriad treasures in the treasury, Li Fan deeply knew that the most valuable among them was not So's accumulated great Tao over the years. It was the treasury itself. It contained the most fundamental structure that constituted So's mountain and sea devouring ability, the cause of So's enlightenment. Such a rare opportunity, once in 1,000 years. Li Fan narrowed his eyes, feeling a torrent slowly transfer from So to himself. In addition to So's accumulation, cultivation, and aptitude, there was also his luck, destiny. The entire sum of his substantial existence was chipped away by Li Fan inch by inch, then deftly taken away. Bastard! So, this mountain and sea's first creature, finally let out a roar of extreme fury. The sound was incredibly sharp, not human-like, but rather like the collective shriek of myriad insects. The black shadow trembled violently, seemingly falling into a frenzy due to the theft of his treasury. How? You can steal, but others cannot. Li Fan remained unmoved, his skillful hands never stopping. He even mocked him from time to time. So's dim figure seemed to show signs of regaining its inky blackness. But for some reason, he ultimately chose not to continue fighting Li Fan. He chose to escape as quickly as possible, minimizing his losses. Before leaving, he did not forget to utter a threat. A venomous voice echoed through the rapidly shattering world. Thief of opportunities, very good. I've noted it down. The inky blackness completely faded away. The treasury also gradually became ethereal, as if disappearing into thin air within this part of the mountain and sea. The things Li Fan could steal became less and less. Ultimately, he could only watch helplessly as So vanished. Li Fan sighed with a hint of lingering desire. The great path of thief of opportunities is indeed extraordinary. Back then, it could even touch and sense the existence of Huan Zhen within my true spirit. This small test has made me realize its wondrous aspects even more. No wonder thief of opportunities, such a cautious person, was willing to abandon everything and fight to the death. Besides his inherent hard nature, he also had absolute confidence in the Tao he wielded. What a pity, if Huan Zhen himself hadn't been unwilling, he might truly have succeeded. Li Fan, in his identity as the Saint Thief of Opportunities, peeled off a layer of flesh from So. In the great Tao of Returning to Truth Hall, a new line of characters was added because of this. Although currently just illusory images, they already manifested their distinctiveness. Instead of being enveloped in colorful hues, they were covered in an ancient gray aura. It revealed an indescribable sense of antiquity. Besides, ancient, there was also a peculiar charm entwined around it. Li Fan observed it closely and faintly discerned something. It was precisely the word, forbidden. It seemed to be incompatible with the mountain and sea, and also with this great Tao hall. Unlike the other mountain and sea great Taos Li Fan had previously encountered and absorbed, which, once entered, would obediently remain there. Instead, it was constantly restless, eager to break free and escape. Although suppressed by the great Tao of Returning to Truth, its struggle was destined to be futile. But this rebelliousness already demonstrated the uniqueness of So's Tao. Li Fan pondered. The three saints once said that once So, who has always been hidden in the shadows, is exposed, even the Tao he controls will be affected accordingly. This is the backlash from attempting to evolve one's Tao to its extreme, beyond the mountain and sea. Now, from the wisp of aura I stole from the great Tao of Returning to Truth, it seems that So's Tao indeed bears traces of breaking the limits of the mountain and sea. Before he could savor the gains from this encounter, the Taichu immortal realm, which had been sustained by So, was about to shatter layer by layer. Li Fan instantly shed his Thief of Opportunities disguise and reverted to his original Zhou Wei appearance. Master, save us! Suddenly, waves of cries for help reached Li Fan's ears. They came from the creatures Li Fan had enlightened. After the world-destroying tribulation, only a tiny fraction of them remained. However, those who survived had all gained immensely. Li Fan thought for a moment and casually took them in. He wasn't afraid of them revealing secrets. How could ordinary creatures understand the change of truth and falsehood? Forget them. Even if the other shore sages were present for Li Fan's battle with So, they would only be utterly confused and bewildered. As So's network shattered, Li Fan appeared in the true mountain and sea. In an instant, he landed in the early mountain and sea, within the sight of the saints. Li Fan's expression remained unchanged, allowing threads of power to entwine around him, guiding him into the Xuanji ring. Looking around, this part of the mountain and sea was far less lively than where Li Fan had been. It even seemed a bit desolate. Not to mention the later saints, even among the original 9 saints of the other shore, only 6 remained. It seemed that the void realm and So had indeed brought immense survival pressure upon them. May I ask, fellow Taoist, where do you come from? Gui Hai Saint asked with a solemn expression. Li Fan simply recounted the entire story, one by one. He only concealed the matter of him transforming into the saint thief of opportunities and feasting. Is that so? Upon learning that reinforcements would arrive from the later mountain and sea, and that their power was so formidable, even the three saints couldn't help but lose their composure, their faces showing joy. Fellow Taoists' ability to infuse true spirit is truly a great fortune for the mountain and sea. Li Fan, however, said, the current plan should be to quickly reunite the divided mountain and sea and jointly build a defense line. Although the Void Realm's current encirclement is grand, it will definitely not be able to withstand our combined strength. With that, Li Fan looked towards where his main body was located. In fact, when So's network collapsed and Li Fan's incarnation officially entered the front section of the mountain and sea. Within the Xuanji ring, a blurry image had already faintly appeared. It was just that the saints were still in shock because Li Fan's transmitted image had suddenly disappeared a moment earlier. I saw that Taoist Fan was proceeding smoothly and about to break the deadlock. What happened? Li Fan frowned, sensed for a moment, then slowly said, the spiritual vein of the mountain and sea creatures was affected, and I couldn't sense what exactly happened within So's network. However, at the last moment, I detected signs of that world's imminent collapse. For us, it should be a good thing. The saints remained silent. They had originally said that Li Fan's trip was merely to delay, but they hadn't expected him to actually break So's network. Although in reality, 80% of the credit belonged to Taiwei's Sacred Emperor's earlier revelation of the mastermind. Nevertheless, this action was truly beyond the saints' expectations. The three saints looked towards the front section of the mountain and sea, and after a moment, nodded slightly. So's power covering the mountain and sea is indeed disappearing. He is leaving. With the three saints' confirmation, the other saints within the Xuanji ring all breathed a sigh of relief. Without So's covetousness, we only need to face the threat of the Void Realm from now on. Although its momentum is fierce, we have slowly grown accustomed to it after all. Compared to the Tao annihilation of the Void Realm, the saints clearly found the existence of the beginning of mountain and sea even more difficult to deal with. This did not mean that the creatures of the beginning of mountain and sea were even stronger than the Void Realm. Rather, although the Void Realm tribulation was terrifying, it had no such variables. Everything was laid bare on the table. In contrast, saints like So, from the beginning of mountain and sea. Their strength was unfathomable, and their thoughts and actions were also full of unknowns. For example, his daring arrival in the middle and late period of the mountain and sea this time was completely beyond the saints' expectations. Regardless of the outcome, it always added many variables. If it were just a game between two sides, that would be fine. It would just be a matter of responding to each move. But they also had to simultaneously face the greatest threat, the Void Realm. With both troubles present, even the three saints felt somewhat troubled. However, So's escape this time was ultimately a breakthrough. With Li Fan's incarnation as the link, the front and back sections of the mountain and sea quickly reached a consensus. On the surface, both sides maintained their positions, refraining from action to avoid provoking a strong reaction from the Void Realm. Underhandedly, Li Fan's incarnation used the true spirit infusion method to create as many newly advanced saints as possible. Then, the saints of the later mountain and sea would gradually smuggle their respective incarnations to the front through the spiritual vein of the mountain and sea creatures. Once everything was ready, both sides would attack simultaneously. The front section of the mountain and sea would attract the attention of the Void Realm's power, while the saints of the later mountain and sea would all emerge, striving to quickly reconnect the mountain and sea. Once the reconnection succeeded, the Void Realm's encirclement would collapse on its own. It was originally almost a dead end. Unexpectedly, it's now a great situation. Fellow Taoist fans' divine ability of true spirit infusion is indispensable. Alas, without Taiwei's Sacred Emperor, we would still be worrying about how to break the network. As the saints chatted and laughed, the atmosphere within the other shore gradually became relaxed. Only Thief of Opportunities privately transmitted a message to Li Fan. May I ask, Taoist Fan, did you encounter anything unusual when So escaped? Li Fan asked with some confusion, why do you say that, fellow Taoist Thief of Opportunities? The Taichu Immortal realm shattered, and it was a chaotic mess. I could only try to protect myself, and I didn't notice anything unusual. Or rather, Li Fan's words suddenly paused. When So left, he seemed extremely angry. And not just because of the escape. Upon hearing this, Thief of Opportunities seemed to ponder. 1747. Years of Mountains and Seas. Chapter 1733. The years of mountain and sea. Fellow Taoist thief of opportunities, have you noticed anything amiss? Li Fan asked, feigning ignorance. There is indeed something strange. For a moment, I seem to feel the descent of another thief of opportunities saint upon mountain and sea, the thief of opportunities saint whispered after a moment of hesitation. Two Taos stood side by side on the same day, appearing in mountain and sea. I only felt my foundation shaking precariously, as if it were about to be snatched away by the other party. At the same time, fear and greed arose in my hard nature. That feeling was unprecedented, the thief of opportunities said with a worried expression. Oh, is that so? Li Fan was startled. He then frowned deeply. How is this possible? Fellow Taoist became a saint through thief of opportunities. One Tao cannot have two masters. How could there be a second? As he spoke, Li Fan seemed to suddenly remember something, and his words abruptly stopped. The thief of opportunities instantly noticed Li Fan's abnormality and quickly asked, Fellow Taoist, have you remembered something? Li Fan hesitated several times, wanting to speak but holding back. The bizarre change that occurred to fellow Taoist does indeed have a traceable origin. However, glancing at Shou Chu Gong beside him, Li Fan slowly said, it involves the secrets of others, so it's not good to speak directly. Fellow Taoist, don't worry, let me ask first. Then I thank fellow Taoist in advance. The thief of opportunities said with a solemn expression. Feigning communication for a while. After a long while, Li Fan finally sent a message to the thief of opportunities, explaining in detail, fellow Taoist must know that Shou Chu Gong became a saint by obtaining a fragment of the Tao of longevity. The thief of opportunities was intelligent after all. Li Fan only mentioned it briefly, and he instantly reacted. Are you saying that Shou Chu Gong experienced the same feeling as me? It was even much more severe than what fellow Taoist experienced. Shou Chu once said that he is not the true master of longevity, but merely obtained one of its fragments by chance. However, that true master of longevity did not exist in the mountain and sea during Shou Chu's lifetime. They only existed in the beginning of mountain and sea. Just like many powerful individuals at that time. They performed the divine ability of severing the future to avoid the Tao annihilation calamity. Thus, they could permanently exist in the past. Under normal circumstances, they would never set foot in the later stages of mountain and sea. That, so, came from the beginning of mountain and sea, and then hastily departed due to its own exposure. Before leaving, it seemed both anxious and angry, coupled with fellow Taoist sensing another aura belonging to the thief of opportunities. Combining these conditions, Li Fan gave his answer. Could it be that the one who descended at that time was an ancient saint from the beginning of mountain and sea, who controlled the thief of opportunities? Even without Li Fan saying so, the thief of opportunities himself had already trembled slightly, having thought of this point. He instinctively felt it was unbelievable, but his fleeting sensation must have been correct. In mountain and sea, there is truly another existence that controls, thief of opportunities. Have I not fully mastered the Tao of thief of opportunities? Born in the beginning of mountain and sea, its foundation must be deeper than mine. Coupled with the proactive emotions that arose in my heart at that time. Could it be that this person's fortune is even greater than mine? The thief of opportunities fell into deep self-doubt. Subsequently, the thief of opportunities seemed somewhat out of sorts. It wasn't until he successfully differentiated his divine thought and resided within a lucky individual of mountain and sea that he finally recovered. Through the mountain and sea network again, what he saw were the sages arrayed before him. There were Lianshan, Guihai, Tai, Guiming, Duan Chen, Shou Chu, and other 6 sages from the earlier period of mountain and sea. There were also more than a dozen others, like the thief of opportunities, who, though not outwardly sages, were incarnations of the sages from the later period of mountain and sea. The thief of opportunities was already in a state of mental turmoil, and upon suddenly seeing his own absence in the mountain and sea ahead, his heart lurched even more. Although he had previously learned from Li Fan that the battle in the mountain and sea ahead was brutal, with only 6 sages remaining, the thief of opportunities, confident in his own strength, had firmly believed that he would definitely be one of the living 6 sages. He never expected to arrive here and see his original seat empty. He became even more disoriented. Even those far less powerful than me survived. Does this not implicitly reveal something? Fortunately, it was only a mortal incarnation, and it had forcibly crossed over through the mountain and sea network, so the other sages did not immediately notice the abnormality in the thief of opportunities' heart. They were merely discussing the grand plan to reunite mountain and sea. Fellow Taoist Zhou Wei is already searching mountain and sea for promising talents. There is an abundance of talent among later generations, but this current era is exceptionally desolate. Yet, the Void Realm's momentum is becoming fiercer. Although we have now converged, we must not be careless, Gui Hai Saint sighed. It was unclear what kind of brutal battles they had endured, but the three sages in this time-space had lost some of their arrogance and gained more cautiousness and foresight. Before mountain and sea was officially reunited, though they were the same person, they had developed slightly different personalities due to different experiences. The divine thought incarnations of the three sages did not usurp the core position, still centering themselves around the three sages of this time-space. All of them nodded in agreement. The atmosphere in the arena became a little solemn for a moment, and Lianshan Saint then said, "Fortunately, once this calamity is overcome, the mountain and sea ahead, as far as the eye can see, will be a smooth path. If this reunion succeeds, then for the next 30 million years of mountain and sea, there will be nothing that can stop us." Upon hearing this, everyone's spirits lifted. Having undergone several reunions, they already knew the benefits. And the combined time of the fragmented mountain and sea sections was less than 1,000,000 years. Now, Lianshan Saint claimed that there were 30 million years of mountain and sea waiting for them ahead. If they truly connected them one by one, to what extent would their strength expand? The sages could not help but fall into contemplation for a moment. Even the somewhat dazed thief of opportunities was invigorated by this. That one hides in the beginning of mountain and sea, its strength already fixed. But I am moving against the flow, merging all my past selves. The true ownership of thief of opportunities is yet unknown. Li Fan suddenly spoke, asking, "May I ask the three sages, how many years ago was the beginning of mountain and sea exactly? And how long will such a reunion last?" As soon as these words were uttered, the Xuanji ring fell silent. Not to mention the sages present, even the transcendence cultivators in mountain and sea knew that the years of mountain and sea were long. Measuring it step by step seemed romantic, but when actually put into practice. Moreover, with Tao annihilation and the void realm separating each segment, it was far more than just, extremely difficult. In the past, the three sages did not specify the exact duration, only vaguely referring to the specific years. Affected by the Xuanji ring, and with the sages intentionally avoiding the issue, they chose to ignore this question. Now, with Li Fan's words revealing it, the sages present had no choice but to confront it. How long has the life of mountain and sea continuously extended? Apart from the three sages, no one present knew the answer. Shou Chu, who wielded longevity, was already considered the longest lived among the sages. However, in front of the three sages, he could only consider himself a young man. Even Shou Chu had no accurate answer to this question. The sages could only focus their gazes on the three sages. It was clear that the three sages truly did not want to answer this question. A long silence fell within the Xuanji ring. It was a divine thought incarnation from a later era that slowly spoke, breaking the silence. "Since fellow Taoist Zhou Wei has asked, then let us tell him. We didn't mention it in the past because we were worried it would hinder everyone's will to reunite. However, after several successful mountain and sea reunions, I believe everyone should have sufficient capacity to bear it." Lianshan Saint heard his other self's words and finally nodded. Knowing early has its advantages. Since that is the case. The three sages simultaneously waved their hands, displaying a continuous image of mountain and sea before everyone. It wasn't the first time they had seen a miniature panorama of mountain and sea, but the sages didn't actually have a precise concept of which section of mountain and sea they were currently in. The fusion of mountain and sea is traceable. Like tree rings, each deeper inch is called a sway year. One sway of mountain and sea, converted to a more familiar calendar for us, is approximately 100 million years. At this point, the sages' expressions were still relatively natural. The number, 100 million, looked daunting, but some sages had indeed lived for that long. Therefore, they could accept it for the time being. Glancing at the emotions of those present, Lianshan continued to slowly say, "Since the fusion of mountain and sea in our birth, as far as we can remember, mountain and sea has existed for nearly 1,000 sway." As if touched by the aura of those long years, Lianshan and the sages' eyes seemed to grow somewhat ancient in that instant. Within the Xuanji ring, there was dead silence. One sway is 100 million years. 1,000 sway of mountain and sea is 100 billion years. At first glance, it didn't seem like such an incredibly long number. But the sages present had all measured and reunited mountain and sea with their own feet. After several arduous efforts, they had only restored 1,000,000 years of time. And ahead, there was still a long journey of 100 billion years waiting. Even with a sage's hard nature, upon realizing this, they couldn't help but feel a momentary dizziness. Even adding the tens of millions of years of smooth path mentioned by Lianshan Saint earlier, they had only traversed 1/10,000th of this path. Could they truly complete it? Such a thought suddenly emerged in the sages' hearts. Within the Xuanji ring, the 6 sages' true forms were fine. With the 3 sages, unified will and blessing, even knowing the truth, they still had a faint glimmer of confidence and managed to hold on. However, the divine thought incarnations of the sages who had arrived first through the mountain and sea network were plunged into varying degrees of mental storms. If one were to say that a 100-mile journey is half done at 90 miles, then what they were doing now was far from even beginning to set foot on the path. To not collapse on the spot after realizing the arduousness of their mission was already a testament to a sage's hard nature. Li Fan, like the other sages, wore an expression of shock and speechlessness. In reality, he had already estimated this long ago. After all, others could only roughly infer the extent of mountain and sea through the occasional illusory images displayed by the 3 sages. But Li Fan had once obtained the outline of mountain and sea changes recorded by Huan Zhen. What was recorded within it was not the mountain and sea of a single era, but the entire panorama of mountain and sea. Even with Li Fan's robust spirit, he nearly got lost when he first witnessed such a vast amount of data. It was no wonder Huan Zhen always kept this option hidden until Li Fan had grown to a certain extent before revealing it. After engraving the entire mountain and sea with infinite spirituality and becoming a Shanghai walker, Li Fan had grown deeply skeptical of the 3 sages' claims about the reunion. The past years of mountain and sea were simply too long. The sages' attempts at reunion were truly like an ant's journey. Not to mention the various obstacles of the void realm. With Li Fan's appearance and the aid of his true spirit, mountain and sea had indeed been successfully reunited several times. But what if Li Fan did not exist in mountain and sea? Could mountain and sea truly be reunited? The matter of mountain and sea's reunion originated at mountains and sea's end and was passed down from the Shanghai walker. Even with the 3 sages, strategic minds and hard nature, they acknowledged and believed it. And they proceeded to execute it. Admittedly, in theory, if 1 can be done, then 100 can be done. Even 1,000 or 10,000 can be done, it's just a matter of grinding work step by step. The reunion of mountain and sea indeed had a possibility of success. But this was based on the premise that everything in the void realm was calm and peaceful. However, in just a mere 1,000,000 years of traveling backward, Li Fan had encountered void realm incarnations, ancient sages weaving webs, and many other unforeseen changes. It was truly hard to imagine how many more twists and turns lay ahead. Li Fan already felt that his life's journey so far had been long enough. But compared to the scale of 100 billion years, he was still like an infant in swaddling clothes. Under the enormous disparity, Li Fan's doubts arose. They had been hidden in his heart for a long time, but there had never been a suitable opportunity to voice them. Now that he finally asked, Li Fan felt a sense of relief. His question was not merely a simple provocation or challenge, but truly contained a hint of seeking guidance. Even Shou Chu, who wielded longevity, could not resolve the doubts in Li Fan's heart. He could only place his hopes on the 3 sages. Witnessing the somewhat lost expressions of the crowd, Lianshan Saint smiled and shook his head slightly. It was precisely because we foresaw this scene that we were unwilling to truthfully disclose the true age of mountain and sea. From the perspective of ordinary beings, seeing the true vastness of mountain and sea will indeed cause genuine confusion. However, since we are willing to execute the mountain and sea reunion plan, it means that this plan must be feasible. 100 billion years may seem long, but it is merely the path we have already walked. If you are willing, you can truly experience the past 100 billion years of mountain and sea within our minds. I believe that once you have personally walked through it, the confusion in your hearts will naturally dissipate. Lianshan Saint's voice echoed within the Xuanji ring, stirring a faint white light. The sages' hearts were also invigorated, and they regained some fighting spirit. Li Fan also began to understand. With the lifespan of an ordinary person, one would naturally be intimidated by the terrifying magnitude of 100 billion. But the 3 sages could be said to be the embodiment of mountain and sea. Just as they said, 100 billion was merely the path they had already walked. Now, walking it again, even if there were a few more bumps in the road. What was there to stop them? It is precisely because they have experienced it that they believe, Li Fan mused. He was also the first to speak. I dare to borrow the memories of the three sages to traverse 1,000 miles of mountain and sea. Like a prophecy of reunion. Otherwise, I worry if I can truly endure. Li Fan's emotions seemed a little low. Although the other sages did not speak, most of them felt the same way inside. The principle was sound, but whether one had personally experienced it, or was merely relying on a vague belief, was a completely different matter. The three sages looked at each other, as if carefully considering the matter. Only then did they nod in agreement. 100 billion years is indeed long. Though I will lead you through it, you may not necessarily be able to persevere through the entire journey. Do not force yourselves, just do your best. A clone's divine thought cannot bear it. Let us use our true forms. It was Lianshan's divine thought clone who spoke. The scene returned to Li Fan's true form, within the Xuanji ring of the current mountain and sea. The three sages' bodies began to emit hazy glows. As if immeasurable light and immeasurable scenes were contained within them. The three sages asked one last question, and after all the sages nodded in confirmation. The light gradually intensified, completely engulfing the figures of the sages. 1748. Hundreds of billions of years of history. Chapter 1734. 100 billion years of history. Lianshan, the civilization of mountain and sea. Guihai, the beings of mountain and sea. Tai, the Tao of mountain and sea. The three sages roughly represent mountain and sea itself. Under Li Fan's urging, the three sages immersed all the sages within the Xuanji ring into their own long memories. This didn't start from the time mountain and sea divided soul. Instead, it began when the Taichu immortal realm disintegrated and mountain and sea gradually merged. Since it was an experience of memories, no truly existing individuals were differentiated. All the sages gathered like countless green light points. What the three sages saw and heard appeared as three separate light screens before the sages. Though they were only watching, the three sages used their immeasurable power to give them a personally experienced sensation. There was almost no difference from experiencing it themselves. Through the eyes of the three sages, they vaguely glimpsed a corner of the true Taichu immortal realm. What was once just an empty concept now gradually became concrete and clear. The Taichu immortal realm was born and evolved after mountain and sea divided soul and during the initial creation of mountain and sea. Perhaps it was because the true God was immeasurable, and mountain and sea found it difficult to consume and devour everything. Or perhaps when the true God fell, mountain and sea didn't acquire everything. In any case, within the Taichu immortal realm, there were many strange existences born of heaven and earth, some even feeding on the Tao. Beings competed with each other, and some even coveted the miraculous encounter of mountain and sea's devouring. All things competed, and life flourished. Without boundaries, without constraints, without taboos. Who lived and who died, who existed and who perished. It all depended on their own abilities. The Taichu immortal realm existed for an unknown period. But mountain and sea could not exist eternally, and it eventually met its end today. Countless tiny black holes appeared in every corner of the Taichu immortal realm. Like terrifying whirlpools, they devoured everything around them. The foundational principles that constructed the Taichu immortal realm instantly vanished within them. Beings scattered, struggling for their lives, no longer caring about their conflicts. Green light points constantly flickered, and the sages' thoughts intertwined. The Taichu immortal realm, what a magnificent and mighty existence, nurturing countless Tao and beings. Yet, it disintegrated overnight under the merging of mountain and sea. No matter how extraordinary, it was merely an attempt by mountain and sea. When mountain and sea realized its destiny was to merge, it was naturally abandoned. Born from a thought of mountain and sea, and extinguished by a thought of mountain and sea. I didn't expect even the three sages to feel fear. This scene is very similar to our struggles before Tao annihilation descended. Everything we experienced, we didn't expect our seniors had already experienced billions of years ago. From this perspective, mountain and sea is like a grand reincarnation. The disintegration of the Taichu immortal realm, like a storm, mercilessly swept away the remaining beings within it. Even powerful entities like the three sages could only be like mayflies in the wind, enduring the elements. They were utterly unable to resist this grand trend of mountain and sea, only able to desperately flap their wings to maintain their existence. The sages, who had just been discussing amongst themselves, now, with the passage of time, suddenly plunged into the storm of mountain and sea's collapse and gradually lost the ability to speak. Only then did they realize what a blessing it was to have been protected by the Taichu immortal realm. It was similar to the calamity of Tao annihilation, which annihilated everything, yet fundamentally different. This storm was mountain and sea making the most of its resources and eliminating dissenters. All that had originated from the god, and which they had not absorbed before, was now to be completely reclaimed. Aside from mountain and sea, there would be nothing else. No transcendence, no one above mountain and sea. To survive in the storm, one could only become a part of mountain and sea. The storm lasted for tens of millions of years before it finally ceased. If it were not just an observation within the three sages, memories, but a personal experience, perhaps less than 1 in 10 of the sages would have survived this calamity. As if having absorbed all the essence obtained from the god, mountain and sea finally revealed its form. Infinite sea, nurturing all possibilities. Without the concept of time, starlight points, birth and death, all continuously evolved and dissipated within it. Above mountain stood majestically. Though formless and shapeless, it represented eternal energy and foundation. Like a pillar, it was precisely because of above mountain's existence that the infinite possibilities in infinite sea could continue. Mountain and sea relied on each other. Seemingly independent, yet mutually dependent. Everyone, this initial mountain and sea, seems vastly different from what we saw later. The later mountain and sea, with its so-called infinite possibilities, still existed within the constraints of time's river, like thousands of great rivers flowing together. But this mountain and sea possibilities were like ripples and waves occasionally stirring in a calm pond. They appeared and dissipated, but did not affect infinite sea itself. Compared to the current mountain and sea, the state of the initial mountain and sea was undoubtedly more stable. Why force the merger? Questions couldn't help but arise in the sages' minds. However, their various thoughts were only those that could emerge from an observer. The beings truly within it were now focused on one thing. That was to survive. Compared to the once unrestrained bliss, the rules of the formed mountain and sea were incredibly strict. Even somewhat cruel. No matter how strong one was, one could not exist eternally. One could only be like the countless possibilities that continuously evolved, were born, and died within infinite sea, with life and death not in one's own hands. Even those who once dominated the Taichu immortal realm now had to silently perish. The new rules of mountain and sea were undoubtedly cruel to the beings of the past. However, they forged a new, sufficiently stable order. Between the birth and death of possibilities, a certain unfathomable law seemed to be followed. Although the pond had starlight points, the pond water always remained as calm as before. Above mountain was like a pillar by the pond. Mountain and sea relied on each other, balanced and harmonious. Most of their former companions perished. The three sages, however, lay dormant within mountain and sea, either having already returned to mountain and sea or quietly awaiting their opportunity. The initial mountain and sea was exceptionally peaceful. The possibilities evolving within it were also extremely simple. There weren't even strictly defined living beings, only life forms like algae. However, as the light points in infinite sea flickered differently, the forms of possibility evolution slowly became richer. In some possibilities, intelligent life began to appear. The three sages, who struggled to survive under mountain and sea's strict rules, took the opportunity to escape into them to catch their breath. Compared to the newly born, ignorant beings of possibility, the three sages, originating from the Taichu immortal realm, were undoubtedly true sages. But the three sages did not attempt any intervention, only observing silently. When they sensed that a possibility was about to perish, they promptly withdrew. And then they continued to survive within infinite sea. This continued for an unknown period. If no accident occurred, mountain and sea might have remained peaceful forever. One day, infinite sea suddenly and without warning, began to boil and churn. The starlit sea, like a bright mirror, seemed to reflect scenes from beyond mountain and sea. The three sages looked up, trying to seize the opportunity to peek. However, they only saw a few fragmented images, but they instantly understood the reason for mountain and sea's turmoil. After mountain and sea devoured the god, it wanted to maintain an eternal state without the passage of time. Without beginning or end, it could naturally exist forever. It seemed to have succeeded. But, at this moment, outside mountain and sea, time was still quietly flowing. Without mountain and sea's prior awareness. It was as if, from beginning to end, a pair of eyes had been coldly watching them. 1749. The Evolution of Mountains and Seas. Chapter 1735. The Evolution of Mountain and Sea. Not only the saints immersed in memories, but mountain and sea itself, were startled and trembled ceaselessly by this discovery. The infinite sea instantly rippled with countless waves. The number of possibilities appearing in this instant, one after another, was more than the sum of all possibilities over the past hundreds of millions of years. The towering mountain above also seemed to be impacted by an invisible force, shaking incessantly. After mountain and sea devoured the gods, it had believed that everything in the world had returned to mountain and sea. Harmonious coexistence would allow for the creation of an eternal world. However, the discovery at this moment cruelly shattered mountain and sea's long-held expectations. Thus, change arose spontaneously. Where did that gaze from outside mountain and sea come from? Could it be the so-called star? If not for that gaze, perhaps mountain and sea could truly maintain this so-called eternal state. Possibilities would be born and perish, but it would not affect mountain and sea itself. Time would be meaningful for the irregularly emerging possibilities within the infinite sea, but meaningless for mountain and sea itself. But with this gaze from outside mountain and sea, everything has become different. Mountain and sea also transformed from the eternal creator and maintainer into an observed entity. No longer detached, no longer eternally unchanging. This inexplicable gaze is likely the culprit for mountain and sea's current predicament. What exactly? After the fear, numerous questions arose in the hearts of the observing saints. But mountain and sea itself could hardly know the answer to this question, let alone the saints present. They could only continue to watch with bewilderment. In the past, unaware of the gaze upon mountain and sea could perhaps maintain its balance on its own. But ever since sensing that wisp of gaze from outside mountain and sea could no longer maintain its former tranquil state. As more and more ripples spread across the infinite sea simultaneously, a pool of water ultimately became difficult to sustain. It was as if a great wind was constantly blowing, carrying the water out of the pool. This caused mountain and sea to merge, breaking the stillness. Time quietly flowed over mountain and sea. After devouring the gods, mountain and sea's attempt to condense its own existence into a single point did not last long before being shattered. Perhaps this implied a certain inevitability. For mountain and sea, the merging of mountain and sea was destined to be a calamity. But for the living beings among the possibilities within mountain and sea, it was undoubtedly a great fortune. During the turmoil of mountain and sea, some living beings in the infinite sea caught a glimpse of the towering mountain above. Thus, they began attempts to ascend. Although most ended in failure, they pressed on, one after another, not knowing what it meant to give up. It was as if some inexplicable force was driving them. Though living beings were born from mountain and sea, the ambition to cross the mountain and sea was their innate instinct. Time, like a carving knife, altered mountain and sea's original shape. The water in the pond slowly flowed outwards. From trickling streams, it became thousands of converging rivers. Wind and water erosion caused the mountain above, originally standing by the pond, to also suffer erosion, slowly merging into the great rivers. As time passed, the merging process of mountain and sea also accelerated. Perhaps it was an inescapable destiny for mountain and sea, or perhaps it was a certain attempt by mountain and sea itself. From the ancient mountain and sea, where mountain and sea stood side by side, maintaining an eternal state, to mountain and sea becoming its current form. A long period of 15 billion years had passed. Possibilities no longer appeared and then vanished, but instead, followed mountain and sea, flowing forward endlessly with time. Great waves sifted the sand. As the life cycle was continuously extended, the upper limit of strength for newly born living beings within mountain and sea was also continuously raised. Finally, one day, a living being leapt from the infinite sea and touched the boundary of the mountain above. Although he did not survive long and perished on his own, the impact he brought to mountain and sea was undoubtedly immense. Like a giant stone, falling into the infinite sea, stirring up countless waves. More and more living beings began to emulate and repeat the act of ascending. It seemed illogical, yet it also seemed very logical. Because the mountain above was simply there. Another 10 billion years passed in the passage of time. The limits that mountain and sea living beings could touch grew higher and higher. Even with the name, infinite, the mountain above was destined to be conquered one day. Over these years, the Saint Lianshan witnessed scene after scene of ascension attempts, and his heart was moved. He also followed the endless stream of people and embarked on his journey. Finally, one day, he left everyone else behind. he ascended to the summit of the mountain above. The saint's vision, accompanying the Saint Lianshan's memory, shifted. Originally, the experiences of the three saints were running in parallel, but now the scene originating from the Saint Lianshan forcefully suppressed the other two saints. Standing at the peak of mountain and sea, the Saint Lianshan did not survey mountain and sea. Instead, he instinctively recalled the wisp of gaze from outside mountain and sea that he had felt many years ago. So he couldn't help but raise his head, trying to look outwards. Just an instant later, the Saint Lianshan felt the presence of that gaze. Even though he was already the strongest being apart from mountain and sea, at that moment, he could not bear it, and his body and divine soul shattered. However, the Saint Lianshan was not without gain. In that instant, he clearly felt that after 10 billion years, that wisp of gaze from outside mountain and sea seemed to have drawn closer. He had a feeling of, if one hears the Tao in the morning, one can die in the evening without regret. The Saint Lianshan did not regret losing his life due to a momentary impulse. Even as he was about to perish, he remained immersed in the shock that the gaze had brought him. However, as the first living being to ascend to the peak of mountain and sea, the Saint Lianshan was destined not to perish just like that. As he was about to vanish in a trance, the scenes he had witnessed in the past, countless living beings within mountain and sea, like sparks igniting a fire, fearlessly exploring and attempting to ascend the mountain above, reappeared in his mind. Mountain and sea is magnificent, and the living beings of mountain and sea are no less so. Mountain and sea is infinite, yet with the finite steps of mountain and sea living beings, it can still be measured. Various insights flashed through Lianshan's mind in a lightning-fast moment. At the last moment before he was about to perish, Lianshan once again attained the Tao. Using his own body as a bridge, he paved a smooth great Tao for Zhang Sheng to ascend to the mountain peak. My past self should not have had such comprehension ability, to have such enlightenment at the brink of death. Is it because that gaze, the Saint Lianshan descended upon the world? Mountain and sea then changed again. Mountain and sea was originally an independent existence. The so-called living beings, civilizations, and great Tao of mountain and sea, all were unrelated to mountain and sea. However, ever since the Saint Lianshan appeared, mountain and sea itself developed more intricate connections with everything within it. Subsequently, the saints Guihai and Tai were born. The three saints acted as catalysts, leading to the emergence of more and more living beings who could rival mountain and sea. Just like Baihua blooming and all trees competing in spring, mountain and sea became unprecedentedly lively and prosperous. It seemed that the merging of mountain and sea was a beneficial endeavor with no drawbacks. The prosperity of mountain and sea lasted for over 30 billion years. During this period, countless possibilities fully evolved. But with the subtle guidance of the three saints, they ultimately all pointed towards Lianshan crossing the sea and utilizing the power of mountain and sea. The three saints were created by the civilization of mountain and sea, and in turn, they influenced the living beings of mountain and sea. 1750. Secretly borrowing the momentum. Chapter 1736. Secretly borrowing momentum. The birth of beings in the mountain and sea acted like a catalyst, further accelerating the integration process of the mountain and sea. At its peak, it began to decline, and the calamity finally arrived. Even the three saints, who had already achieved Tao, could not perceive where the first Tao annihilation truly originated from. It seemed to appear out of thin air, suddenly leaping forth. However, at that time, the mountain and sea were still in their prime, and the disappearance of a few possibilities was akin to humans shedding hair daily. It didn't truly signify anything. Until the Tao annihilation wave, as time flowed, always accompanied the mountain and sea. One day, it came to fruition. Unbeknownst to them, it had grown to a point where it could contend with the mountain and sea. Like a ghostly shadow, it suddenly appeared, confronting the mountain and sea. Wherever it went, possibilities collapsed, and the Tao ceased to exist. The mountain and sea were severed by it. The originally continuous and unified existence was forcibly cut into countless pieces. The mountain and sea could still maintain a subtle connection through their internal Mailuo. But the beings within the mountain and sea were, on the temporal level, divided into broken and fragmented individuals. Not only was their strength greatly reduced, even some memories were affected, becoming distorted and incomplete. From the perspective of the three saints looking back at the past 100 billion years of the mountain and sea, the various saints often encountered certain memory fragments that seemed to be covered with a layer of grayish white. Those were the parts that were lost due to the fracturing of the mountain and sea, and then supplemented by the three saints' self-visualization. In the memory perception of the three saints, 500 billion years of long time had passed from the first appearance of Tao annihilation until now. It was truly too long. Furthermore, the will of the three saints was not a simple individual. Instead, it was incarnated into billions, almost pervading all possibilities. It encompassed most of the civilizations, saint spirits, and Tao paths of the mountain and sea. The amount of data was unimaginable. Had the three saints not intentionally blurred it, this 500 billion year memory torrent would have been enough to wash, distort, and rewrite the personalities of the observing saints to a certain extent. Although it was a virtual leap, it did not prevent the saints from truly experiencing the journey the three saints had once taken. However, it was not detailed in the countless possibilities within the mountain and sea, but focused on the overall time experienced by the mountain and sea. The saints saw that the initial calamity of Tao annihilation was indeed negligible. The possibilities eroded and disappeared by Tao annihilation were not even 1/10,000th of the self-evolution and demise of the mountain and sea itself. However, in the contention of the great Tao, one's gain is another's loss. Once a trend of collapse is born, if not stopped, it is destined to grow indefinitely. Even the smallest variable, when superimposed over hundreds of billions of years, will become an astronomical existence. By now, the void realm formed by the erosion of Tao annihilation could already contend with the mountain and sea. Even in the more distant end of time, the demise of the mountain and sea seemed to have become a foregone conclusion. A long journey slowly approached its end. After exiting the memories of the three saints, it took a long time for the saints' gazes to become clear again. Although it's the path we've traveled before, the thought of having to retrace it still makes my scalp tingle. This path is truly too long, too difficult to walk. Bai Xiao exhaled deeply, filled with emotion. From an outsider's perspective, the birth of Tao annihilation seems utterly unreasonable. Outside the mountain and sea, there was no void realm. Besides that observing gaze, there was nothing else. But with the evolution of the mountain and sea, Tao annihilation unexpectedly emerged, eroding the mountain and sea. Could it be that the void realm originated from the gaze of the mountain and sea? After the initial exclamations, the saints still focused on the peculiarities in the three saints' memories. In my opinion, probably not. Even with the current state of collapse of the mountain and sea, the void realm is only evenly matched with the mountain and sea. It only relied on long periods of time and accumulated erosion to ultimately cause the decay of the mountain and sea. And that gaze, thief of opportunities said, looking towards Lianshan Saint. If Lianshan Saint's perception at that time was not mistaken, the pressure brought by that gaze was absolutely superior to the mountain and sea. The other saints pondered for a moment and deeply agreed. Lianshan's achievement of Tao was, in fact, on par with the mountain and sea. Yet, before that gaze, he couldn't even sustain for an instant. It was only natural that the mountain and sea changed because of it. At this point, the saints could not help but fall into a strange silence. Since the gaze beyond the mountain and sea was mentioned, its origin could not be avoided. The answer seemed obvious, yet it was truly incredible, making the saints even somewhat hesitant to be the first to speak it out. It was Li Fan, however, unrestrained, who directly broke the silence with a question. It seems that the doubts in everyone's hearts are the same as mine. With such power, a single gaze could awe and alter the mountain and sea. Could this gaze originate from the God? This seemed to be the only reasonable answer. The saints found it difficult to answer Li Fan's question, all looking towards Lianshan Saint, the only one who had truly seen that gaze. I do not know either. After a moment of silence, Lianshan Saint merely offered a rare bitter smile. No one has ever seen the true face of God, except for the divided soul of the mountain and sea. Since I have never seen God and do not know its form, even if I had the chance to meet its gaze, how could I be certain? However, if we deduce it according to common sense, your conjecture is probably not wrong. Lianshan added. Tai, however, shook his head. God transcends the mountain and sea, so it is difficult to deduce with common sense. All our conjectures and deductions probably cannot yield the correct result. However, one thing can be confirmed. Even if that gaze does not belong to God, it originates from an existence higher than the mountain and sea. It can be compared to a star. Perhaps it is the remnants of the mountain and sea's divided soul that were not completely devoured. Or perhaps it comes from an unknown, vast place, an entity on par with God. All the changes in the mountain and sea since the eternal state have originated from it. Gui Hai Saint concluded. A warmth, following Gui Hai Saint's voice, surged into the hearts of the saints. While diluting the sense of vicissitude from observing 100 billion years of memories, it also gradually dispelled the invisible influence brought by that gaze. Lianshan looked at Li Fan. Fellow Taoist Zhou Wei, how is your perception? Do you still have doubts? Li Fan first nodded and then shook his head. Even after experiencing it once, retracing the path still feels extremely difficult. I do not possess the wisdom, courage, or perseverance of the three saints. However, even ants cling to life. As saints, besides the path of reuniting and saving the mountain and sea, there seems to be no other better way to survive. We can only try our best for survival. Li Fan spoke frankly, which was somewhat unexpected by the saints present. However, it was also true, and all the saints nodded slightly. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Let's first conquer this peak before us. Li Fan smiled. What Li Fan spoke of was, naturally, the mountain and sea heavily besieged by the void realm ahead. Having regained their composure, the saints' thoughts once again focused on the incarnations of the mountain and sea in the forefront. The three saints from the previous timeline began to introduce the situation. Compared to the previous crisis of being besieged and killed by the void realm incarnations, it is not worse. The situation has withered to its current state primarily because the invasion of Tao annihilation is too severe. Even with our protection, the mountain and sea inevitably diminish day by day. Lianshan Saint said, pointing at the waves blowing from outside the mountain and sea. The warm white light of the Xuanji ring covered the entire section of the mountain and sea. However, it was visibly and continuously twisting and oscillating, as if being casually manipulated by an invisible hand, constantly changing shape. As the Xuanji ring was, the mountain and sea protected by it were truly like fragile bubbles, precarious and on the verge of instantly bursting at any moment. The severity of Tao annihilation is indeed extremely rare. Even in Lianshan Saint's 100 billion years of memory, such a degree of Tao annihilation aggregation is exceedingly rare. No wonder it is said that once this hurdle is passed, the path ahead will be smooth. Within this Tao annihilation, if we merely protect ourselves, it might not be difficult. However, to simultaneously protect the mountain and sea. The saints, for the first time, personally felt the immense pressure from outside the mountain and sea, each frowning and pondering countermeasures. The pressure of Tao annihilation is on par with the mountain and sea. Only saints who can be on par with the mountain and sea can shoulder it. Previously, we fell into a desperate situation, and the number of saints was dwindling. But now, with my true spirit infusing divine abilities, as long as the mountain and sea are maintained, enough saints can always be created. For every additional saint, the pressure of the Tao annihilation's momentum decreases by 1 part. If there are enough saints, this calamity will resolve itself without us needing to act. Li Fan said softly. Then he changed the topic. However, this can only be a last resort. Firstly, although true spirit infusion has the ability to defy heaven and change fate, it also requires suitable subjects. The number of cultivators at the Transcendence realm, just one step away from becoming saints, is actually not that many. Secondly, I'm afraid time is not on our side. Lianshan Saint nodded slightly. Fellow Taoist Zhou Hui's perception is indeed keen. Perhaps sensing the departure of Suo, the pressure from the void realm outside the mountain and sea has become increasingly fierce. The Tao annihilation waves are rising one after another. It will soon reach its peak. We don't have that much time to slowly create saints. As if to confirm Lianshan Saint's words, the white light outside the Xuanji ring suddenly twisted violently. Even the saints seated within the ring felt a sudden jolt. Looking up, in the pitch-black void realm, layers of figures seemed to begin descending. Like an army pressing down, their military might directly aimed. Void realm incarnations. The three saints frowned simultaneously. Previously, to block Li Fan and others who came to support, the void realm was willing to dispatch more than 10 void realm incarnations. Now, to completely take down this section of the mountain and sea where the Tao of living beings resided, the void realm would naturally mobilize more power. Especially after Suo was forced back by Li Fan. Even the sheer momentum of Tao annihilation was somewhat difficult to resist. Now, with so many void realm incarnations added to the mix, what strategy should we employ? For a moment, all the saints couldn't help but feel a bit troubled. I do have a plan, but I don't know if it's feasible. The one who spoke was Shou Chu Gong. Of course, in reality, he was representing Li Fan's unified thoughts. Shou Chu, speak freely. Previously, from the memories of the three saints, we witnessed the scene of the mountain and sea changing with the momentum. And this place is where the lifeblood of the mountain and sea lies. Perhaps we can activate the inherent power of the mountain and sea to resist the momentum of Tao annihilation. Shou Chu said calmly. The saints were silent, seemingly deep in thought. Shou Chu then continued on his own. The mountain and sea appear weak and precarious, needing our salvation. However, after observing the three saints' 100 billion years of memories, I have gained new insights. Are the civilization of the mountain and sea, the Tao of the mountain and sea, and the beings of the mountain and sea truly the mountain and sea itself? They are merely various derivations after the mountain and sea changed with the momentum. In the very beginning, the scene of the mountain and sea relying on each other and existing eternally was the true form the mountain and sea should have had. In other words, all these various things are, for the mountain and sea, merely external objects. Just like clothes on a person. They are not the mountain and sea itself. Shou Chu's words were earth-shattering. The saints now knew that the so-called civilization, beings, and Tao of the mountain and sea were largely the origin of the three saints. Now, Shou Chu uttered shocking words, saying that the three saints could not represent the mountain and sea. Inside the Xuanji ring, there was dead silence. The saints kept their eyes down, neither agreeing nor openly opposing, but quietly observing the reaction of the three saints. Civilization belongs to civilization, and the mountain and sea belong to the mountain and sea. Shou Chu Gong's words are excellent, and I deeply agree. How do the three saints feel? Li Fan, on the other hand, clearly sided with Shou Chu Gong. After Li Fan, Dao De also spoke in agreement. When the other three saints simultaneously raised their doubts, the three saints could no longer stand by idly. Shou Chu has observed the mountains and seas for countless years. After gaining our memories, he has indeed gained even deeper insight into the mysteries of the mountain and sea. In a sense, you are correct. All attachments within the mountain and sea cannot represent the mountain and sea itself. Ever since the first being was created, stained with innate ferocity, and the mountain and sea had no choice but to destroy it. The perfect state the mountain and sea envisioned was the eternal time after the destruction of the Taichu immortal realm. Possibilities would ripple and fluctuate, and beings would multiply and disappear within them. But it would not affect the mountain and sea in the slightest. The mountain and sea would remain eternally independent, until eternity. It's just a pity. This attempt failed. The mountain and sea and the civilizations evolving within them became entangled again, deeper and deeper. However, ultimately, their essence is still different. Lianshan did not deny Shou Chu Gong's conjecture. The saints, due to Lianshan's words, all fell into contemplation. In a sense, our appearance was actually harmful rather than beneficial to the mountain and sea. The most ideal outcome for the mountain and sea's divided soul was to collectively achieve a new god. Even if that wasn't possible, maintaining the initial state of eternal unending was still the best choice. But Li Fan recalled the scene he had once witnessed of the lone star descending and engulfing everything, and with a sense of understanding, he slowly said, any so-called beings, civilizations, or Tao within the mountain and sea are manifestations of the mountain and sea's origin power. In reality, they represent the loss of their power. The stronger the civilization and beings of the mountain and sea, the weaker the mountain and sea itself becomes. In an instant, Li Fan thought of something, and his words suddenly stopped. He had a conjecture, but it was truly incredible, so he did not speak rashly. He just kept recalling the scene when the lone star descended. Mountain and sea transformation outline, star radiance rhythm section. Lianshan Saint seemed unaware of Li Fan's internal fluctuations and continued, Shou Chu's idea is indeed good. The mountain and sea and the void realm are evenly matched. Now that the void realm army is pressing, the mountain and sea can naturally also mobilize troops to fight. The key question is, how exactly can it be done? Behind the void realm, there is vaguely a will directing it. But the mountain and sea. Lianshan Saint shook his head slightly. Ever since the collapse of the mountain and sea's eternal state, it has been a long time since its true will was felt. Even if it could occasionally be sensed, it was merely repeated instincts. Unconscious instinct might be able to face crises and fight back. But it cannot, like the void realm, mobilize troops and adapt to the situation. This is perhaps the most important reason why the mountain and sea are at a disadvantage. 1751. The future in a trance. Even if we are called Lianshan and Guihai, we cannot truly gather the immense power of mountain and sea in one place. Furthermore, while an offense can be freely redirected, how can a defense be arbitrarily shifted? Under the grand backdrop of Tao Annihilation's encroachment, almost every part of mountain and sea is at its limit of endurance. If we were to draw power from mountain and sea here, I fear the other sections of mountain and sea would immediately be swallowed by the void realm. Our vision is obstructed by the void realm, preventing us from surveying the entirety of mountain and sea. Even if we could control the power of mountain and sea, we wouldn't be able to contend with the mastermind behind the void realm, the three saints concluded. Li Fan pondered for a moment, then sighed, it seems I was being a bit too imaginative. However, the situation is critical now. Mountain and sea has a surplus of power but cannot deploy it. To be at the mercy of the void realm without any resistance feels truly stifling. If there were a saint whose gaze could span from beginning to end, and whose power could move mountains and seas, wouldn't the crisis be instantly resolved? Upon hearing this, all the saints were momentarily speechless. I actually think fellow Taoist Zhou Hui's previous idea might not be impossible. During the silence, thief of opportunities, words suddenly drew the attention of the saints. As the saying goes, place one in a death trap and he will survive. In times of life and death, one can certainly unleash extraordinary power. Although we cannot actively deploy the great power of mountain and sea now, perhaps we can force it out. Billions of years of memories had completely washed away the gloom in Thief of Opportunities' heart. He regained his former confidence and slowly said, not only to force out the inherent power of mountain and sea, but also to include Chu Tianwei and Xiao Zidai, the couple. I refuse to believe they wouldn't leave any protective measures for such a crucial central node that maintains the spiritual veins of mountain and sea's living beings. The Tao of living beings, after all, is dependent on mountain and sea. If this part of mountain and sea is destroyed, no matter what their plans are or where they are, they will inevitably be affected. Thief of Opportunities, analysis, it must be said, made some sense. While the saints were contemplating its feasibility, only the three saints and Li Fan noticed the additional meaning conveyed by Thief of Opportunities, words. Forcing mountain and sea, Thief of Opportunities, idea is a bit dangerous. Interesting. If it were the normal Thief of Opportunities, influenced by the Xuanji Ring's unity of heart and mind, he shouldn't have come up with such an idea. It's more like the kind of thought Thief of Opportunities would have after breaking free from his shackles and returning to his true nature. Could it be? Li Fan observed discreetly, without changing his expression. After billions of years, even the unity of heart and mind has somewhat faded. My situation with Shouchu and Daoda is still good, as we are a singular trinity, sharing with each other and closely connected. But the other saints in the Xuanji Ring seem to show signs of losing control. Although it's still very faint, it absolutely cannot be ignored. Li Fan had noticed this point, and the three saints naturally perceived it as well. However, they also did not expose it, merely letting the Xuanji Ring flash almost imperceptibly with white light. Whether it was out of control or not was a different matter from the feasibility of his suggestion. After some deduction, the three saints acknowledged that Thief of Opportunities' plan indeed had some chance of success. However, it was not suitable as the best strategy and could only be used as a last resort, a backup plan. First, let's accumulate strength and fight a battle. Although the Void Realm is powerful, we don't need to be afraid before fighting. Not to mention the scene of Shouchu and fellow Taoist Zhou Wei repelling a multitude of Void Realm incarnations with their divine might is still vivid. Tai looked beyond the Void Realm, a hint of coldness flashing in his calm eyes. The multiple resynchronizations with mountain and sea, which brought about an increase in strength, also caused the three saints to gradually shift towards the temperament of their complete selves. As the fierce individual who wielded the Zongsheng cudgel and devoured and assimilated all other innate five ties, Tai would certainly not surrender easily. Facing Tai's praise, Li Fan and the other two merely smiled without answering, not responding too much. As the holders of the true spirit infusion, divine ability, the most important source of backup power for the resynchronized mountain and sea, the saints would certainly not let him go to the battlefield unless absolutely necessary. Unless he volunteered. However, this time, Li Fan had already made up his mind to quietly observe the changes. Therefore, for the next period, Li Fan's task was to wander through mountain and sea all day, searching for talented individuals and guiding them to become saints. Time's river had advanced hundreds of thousands of years beyond the time point he was familiar with. Mountain and sea had given birth to countless talents. Successfully screening them was no easy task. This time, Li Fan also proactively greeted Taiwei's sacred emperor. He also selected good candidates from among the people of the Taiwei sacred dynasty. In the past, when choosing saint candidates, attention was mostly focused on cultivators of the nameless and transcendence realms. However, the sacred dynasty was a special case, a world where one person practiced a unique Tao. Although it had billions of subjects, apart from Taiwei's sacred emperor, the highest realm anyone else reached was true immortal. Even if resources and talent met all the requirements for advancing to saint, the time required would certainly be very long. It was simply too long to wait. But this time, Li Fan had a premonition that the battle to take over the mountain and sea ahead might be a protracted one. The countless people of the sacred dynasty could not be ignored. Li Fan's appearance greatly alleviated Taiwei's sacred emperor's alchemy pressure. Therefore, he had a considerable degree of goodwill towards Li Fan. Naturally, he fulfilled Li Fan's request. Not only were all living beings in the vast sacred dynasty open for Li Fan to choose from, he even proactively recommended a few individuals to Li Fan. Although these few have not cultivated, their heart nature and innate talent are both superior. Among the entire sacred dynasty, they are among the highest tier. All they lack is the corresponding opportunity. After the battle with Suo, Taiwei's sacred emperor seemed to have undergone another transformation. Originally, he was purely a noble and incomparable sacred emperor of the world, high above all. Now, however, an ethereal and transcendent aura occasionally emerged from him. Li Fan looked at him with some interest, and couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist, Taiwei seems to have gained new insights." Taiwei's sacred emperor did not hide it. "I used to think that as the emperor ruling a sacred dynasty, I should govern all people and oversee everything. However, after observing the three saints' thousand-year memories of mountain and sea and seeing that mountain and sea itself cannot maintain eternity, my thoughts have changed accordingly. Always present, everywhere, is indeed true. But perhaps, to be hidden between heaven and earth, present yet not present. To make the people unaware, to take it as common and forget. Perhaps that is even better." Li Fan frowned slightly, not voicing his agreement. Taiwei's sacred emperor smiled when he saw this. "It's just an attempt. Fellow Taoist Zhou Wei doesn't need to worry too much. The sacred dynasty, after all, is my sacred dynasty. Even if there's an earth-shattering change, returning to a stable state is within my single thought. Fellow Taoist Taiwei is truly domineering." Li Fan couldn't help but praise. Pausing slightly, Li Fan suddenly brought up an unrelated question. "Fellow Taoist Taiwei also fought against Suo before, I wonder. How did it feel?" Taiwei's sacred emperor saw Li Fan's expression and knew his meaning. He candidly said, "Nothing special. If the so-called beings of the Taichu immortal realm are all of such talent, the Taiwei sacred dynasty might be able to expand its territory at the beginning of mountain and sea." The meaning in Taiwei's sacred emperor's words perfectly coincided with Li Fan's thoughts. Li Fan merely smiled at him, then moved past the topic. After 18 years of traveling through the sacred dynasty, Li Fan only selected 3 suitable candidates. 2 of them were recommended by the sacred emperor. One was a sacred dynasty educator, whose life's purpose should have been to convey the sacred emperor's words and spread them to all people. However, this person transmitted them but did not believe in them. In the sacred dynasty, this was naturally an absolutely treasonous existence. However, he hid it very well, never being noticed by those around him. If it were just this, he would never have been valued by the sacred emperor. The most interesting point was that this person, as an educator, was well versed in various classics. He knew very well what kind of great existence the sacred emperor he served was. Therefore, he also understood in his heart that his little rebelliousness would certainly not escape the great sacred emperor. The supreme sacred emperor is like heaven and earth, encompassing all things. How could he not tolerate my tiny heresy? Even though he harbored disloyal thoughts, he knew the proper limits. The sacred dynasty was the sacred emperor's cultivation foundation, so he would naturally not allow anyone to destroy it. Although he did not believe in the sacred emperor, he did not spread his rebellious thoughts to others. Instead, he was absolutely loyal to the task of spreading the Tao. Diligent and conscientious, never negligent. This person is truly contradictory. Li Fan smiled and marveled when he first learned of this person's life. "I don't see it as contradictory. It's merely a desire to find a possibility of escaping the sacred dynasty. Since he wants it so much, why shouldn't I give it to him? Furthermore, this person's cultivation will certainly not dishonor the sacred dynasty's prestige," Taiwei's sacred emperor said lightly. The educator's name was Su Xiaozhong, a very ordinary name, yet it seemed to hold a deeper meaning. The other person recommended by the sacred emperor was a sacred dynasty martial artist, Hong Changquan. Under the cultivation system permitted by the sacred dynasty, he effortlessly reached the pinnacle. He was indeed like a celestial being, quite usable. As for the last of the three, he was personally chosen by Li Fan. Compared to Su Xiaozhong and Hong Changquan, he was as ordinary as could be. Even Taiwei's sacred emperor was somewhat puzzled by Li Fan's choice. However, the sacred emperor did not inquire further, and Li Fan did not explain. The reason he chose the other party was because Li Fan felt a faint sense of familiarity from this person. The familiarity did not come from this world, nor from any previous life he had experienced. Instead, it originated from intuition. Previously, when Li Fan was experiencing the endless reincarnation woven by the Tao of Zhou Wei, he began to doubt and speculate about his own keen intuition. So-called intuition was merely the memory of things experienced countless times after countless reincarnations. Whether the speculation was true or false, it was irrelevant for now. Now, Li Fan actually felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had met this mortal from the sacred dynasty several times. How could he not attach importance to it? Li Fan silently stared at this mortal named Mo Yang. He tried to find clues from his intuitive memories. Everything in the past seemed to have completely faded. No matter how he searched, he couldn't find its existence. But this time, Li Fan was very patient. He kept all three by his side for cultivation, continuing to search for talents capable of becoming saints within mountain and sea. Adding the 3 saints might help the current situation. But it wouldn't be much help. Li Fan still had to continue. Over 100 years passed, and the situation in mountain and sea became increasingly dire. Indeed, with help from the future mountain and sea, they successfully resisted the pressure from the void realm. But soon, the void realm also sensed this external force. Without hesitation, it chose to escalate. Like dark clouds obscuring the sun, the accumulated power of the void realm was even greater than before. Under the heavy obstructions of the void realm, even the 3 saints' vision could no longer penetrate or traverse. They were completely trapped within their limited scope. Fortunately, their foundation remained, and for a time, they were not easily breached. They even repelled the void realm incarnation's attacks several times with the cooperation of Li Fan, Shou Chu, and Dao Da. But it won't last much longer. 500 more years at most. Li Fan was content with only acting at critical moments. He continued to search for good candidates while observing Mo Yang. It was as if he was constantly piecing together fragments. That past that had once disappeared was slowly resurfacing. If I'm not mistaken, the time point is roughly the same as now. But the experiences encountered are completely different. The sacred emperor perished, and before his death, he scattered all his good fortune among the people, leading to a multitude of dragons emerging from the abyss. Mo Yang was one of them. He reached the saint realm directly, and was even someone I had once been in unity of heart and mind with. Just like Dao Da and Shou Chu. Li Fan slowly closed his eyes, hiding the extreme turmoil in his heart. Even seeing the collapse of mountain and sea would not make him lose his composure like this. Perhaps only the shock of witnessing the appearance of the solitary star back then could compare to this. The more I recall, the clearer it becomes. It feels as if I truly experienced it myself. It's definitely not a baseless fantasy. But the key is, when? Li Fan knew the key was not Mo Yang, but himself. Once again, Li Fan reviewed all his memories since his transmigration. He even asked Shou Chu Gong and Dao Da to help him review, to ensure nothing was missed. Finally, he confirmed that he had never experienced such a life. Fellow Taoist fan, have you noticed that the mountain and sea in this memory is so different from the mountain and sea we are in? The demise of Taiwei's sacred emperor is something that has never happened in your many reincarnations. It's as if it exists in another mountain and sea. Shou Chu's words plunged Li Fan into deep contemplation. Another mountain and sea. These 5 words seemed to trigger a switch. Coupled with the previous act of continuously piecing together lost memories. This caused another lost memory of Li Fan to also begin to be brought along, slowly resurfacing. That was at the end of time. The void realm was about to swallow everything, and even the last saint, Chu Xinwei, despite her efforts to turn the tide, could not change the situation. Heh, fellow Taoist fan, aren't you going to make a move yet? He then said this to Li Fan. Afterward, Li Fan vaguely lost control of his body. He even lost the memories of that time, only vaguely remembering the scene of mountain and sea ceasing to exist and the solitary star appearing. At this moment, these lost memories were slowly reappearing in Li Fan's mind. One finger, making the star appear and then return. It can block the star for a time, but not for a lifetime. I am also seeking this answer. If I haven't seen it before, where did my Huan-Zhen come from? Scene after scene, like thunderbolts, continuously illuminated Li Fan's mind. Ignoring the intense pain in his mind, Li Fan desperately maintained his inner calm, analyzing everything that had suddenly come to his knowledge. Were these words spoken by me? Or by Huan-Zhen? No, it was definitely not spoken by Huan-Zhen. Otherwise, why would it mention my Huan-Zhen? Previously, Li Fan had only thought that when he lost his memory, his body was controlled by Huan-Zhen. Now it seems, perhaps not. 1752. A perfect person. It's more likely that these are my own personal experiences. It's just that I've lost my past memories, so they only manifest as a so-called vague intuition. At this moment, a doubt arose in Li Fan's hard nature. Was he still in the Huan-Zhen simulation? But having already achieved the sage realm, Li Fan's hard nature was no longer what it once was. After a brief tremor, he quickly calmed down. Such doubts are meaningless. True is false, false is true. The so-called true mountain and sea is merely Huan-Zhen re-evolving from the absolute void swallowed by the star. What's crucial is my past. If my guess is correct, then what I consider my first life was probably not the true first life. My Huan-Zhen. What exactly is Huan-Zhen? At Mountains and Sea's End, Li Fan had seen the divine abilities of the other shore sages. False is true, the art of deriving an uncertain future, reversing time's river, and the inheritance of heavenly selection. Li Fan had always had a faint suspicion. Coupled with the sudden recovery of the memory of his own words, if I had never seen it, where would my Huan-Zhen come from? The answer seemed to be on the tip of his tongue. However, precisely because of this, Li Fan found it even more incredible. Could it be that the so-called Huan-Zhen is a fusion of true is false, false is true, and the great Tao mastered by the various sages? Then, who is the consciousness hidden deep within Huan-Zhen? Huan-Zhen had its own independent consciousness. There was no doubt about this. Whether it was the hungry, devouring sensation whenever it encountered something useful to itself, or its timely guidance to Li Fan at critical moments. All undoubtedly confirmed this point. Then the question arose. If Huan-Zhen was merely a collection of great Tao, a pure tool, then it shouldn't possess its own consciousness. Could it be that the great Tao aggregated by Huan-Zhen gave birth to an independent will? Or could it be, recalling the other self who suddenly appeared at the end of time's river, at the last moment of mountain and sea's annihilation? A world-shattering idea suddenly surged in Li Fan's hard nature. Once it appeared, it was like a bursting dam, surging forth uncontrollably. It filled Li Fan's hard nature, making him instinctively crave to immediately verify the correctness of this conjecture. Huan-Zhen is me. I am Huan-Zhen. With a single thought, mountain and sea changed, and all things vanished. The three who had followed him for years, Mo Yong and the sages, were nowhere to be seen. Shou Chu Gong and Dao Da, who had sat with him on the Xuanji ring, united in hard nature and virtue, also suddenly disappeared. Even the other shore sages, the entire mountain and sea, all seemed to vanish in an instant, as if an indescribable, unfathomable force completely and utterly isolated Li Fan from the outside world. In the world, besides Li Fan, there seemed to be nothing else. Then, a figure floated out of the void. Its form and appearance were identical to Li Fan's. Only its demeanor and temperament were vastly different. When Li Fan saw the other self opposite him, his heart skipped a beat. He felt both incredibly familiar and extremely strange. With just one glance, he knew why this strangeness arose. The Li Fan opposite him stood quietly, and even without speaking, he instilled a natural sense of peace deep within one's hard nature. As if everything could be entrusted to him, and he would never disappoint. Utterly sincere, utterly pure, utterly noble. Good like Su Bai, virtuous like Shou Chu. He was originally the savior of mountain and sea, truly a perfect person in the world. You are me. Li Fan was utterly shocked. The Li Fan opposite him offered no explanation. As Li Fan spoke, it was as if ice and snow melted away. Unimaginable countless memories flashed forth from the darkness, like a sky full of shining stars, arriving in a flurry. Not long ago, Li Fan had experienced 100 billion years from the beginning of mountain and sea to the current mountains and sea's end, from the perspective of the three sages. 100 billion years of mountain and sea's time, though long, was barely bearable for Li Fan's current strength. But now, Li Fan was about to be utterly annihilated and destroyed by his own past memories. Like an ant in an ocean, plunging in, he could not see its entirety. He could only vaguely glimpse the past from the countless overlapping droplets around him. 100 billion years, the greater part of mountain and sea's life, was an absolutely long period of time. But at this moment, in Li Fan's sea of memories, it was merely a single drop of water condensed from one reincarnation. In the vast ocean, the number of water droplets was more than 100 billion. That was the path the Li Fan of the past had walked. Countless reincarnations, countless attempts. All for the sake of saving mountain and sea from the star. But just as Li Fan said, it can block the star for a time, but it cannot block the star for a lifetime. The ultimate outcome of all final reincarnation memories was the descent of the lone star, devouring everything. Mountain and sea, ultimately unsalvable. Compared to the other self hidden within Huan Zhen, the current Li Fan was truly pitifully weak. He could observe and receive 10 reincarnation memories. But slowly, at 100, 1,000 times, he could no longer bear it. It was as if he had fallen into an abyss. The pressure from all around him was unimaginably immense. It almost crushed Li Fan's divine soul completely. It's not time yet. Go back. Just as Li Fan was about to be completely swallowed by the surrounding darkness, a voice appeared, saving him in time. The darkness receded, and the vast, boundless past memories, like bubbles, vanished without a trace before Li Fan. The two exchanged glances. Adding the clues he had previously glimpsed from his memories, Li Fan finally pieced together the truth. The Li Fan of the past had tried countless times to save mountain and sea from the star. But just like the countless living beings struggling within mountain and sea, everything was futile. He had tried an unknown number of times, but not once had he truly managed to prevent the star's arrival. Repeated failures, no future of success in sight. Yet, he never gave up. In the very end, he decided to make some changes. This change was the origin of the current Li Fan. Li Fan finally understood why, from beginning to end, Huan Zhen had been so resistant to contact with him. Aside from the vast difference in their sheer scale, where any casual thought from the other party could potentially engulf Li Fan. More importantly, it was to maintain the current Li Fan's independence. To be unaffected by the past, to act according to his own instincts. After all, they originated from the same being. If they were to come into close contact, the result would be just as Li Fan had experienced. In an instant, he would fall into the abyss, swallowed by his past memories. His divine soul utterly shattered. Saving the world. Save yourself first. Only the last voice echoed in Li Fan's hard nature. The concealment that had sealed off everything external suddenly receded. As if suddenly emerging from underwater, Li Fan instinctively took deep breaths. Even though he had learned the answer he had desperately sought, Li Fan did not feel a sense of sudden enlightenment. Instead, various uncontainable emotions arose in his hard nature. The only thing worth celebrating is that past me is probably truly dead. 1753. Together to solve doubts. Chapter 1739. Uniting hearts to dispel doubts. No matter how powerful his past self was, the day he decided to make a change, he ceased to exist conceptually. What is now sealed within Huan Zhen is not a true spirit. Instead, it is experience, built upon an incredibly vast amount of memory data. The owner of these memories originally belonged to Li Fan. Therefore, once contact was made, they irresistibly converged into Li Fan's mind. But precisely because the past Li Fan had become powerful to an inconceivable extent, even if his existence perished, the long memories of countless mountain and sea lifespans through reincarnation could still react to various external situations like a real consciousness. When encountering a suitable and important Tao, he would feel hungry and devour it. When encountering a fatal crisis, he would warn him. He would even come out to greet old friends with whom he had fought alongside. But he ultimately no longer existed. Only instinctual reactions based on his vast memories remained. Therefore, upon realizing that the current Li Fan's strength was not yet sufficient to fully accept his past experiences, he decisively severed the connection. Thus, Li Fan returned to reality. Fellow Taoist Fan, is something amiss? Why do I vaguely feel your hard nature is unsettled? What happened? Almost instantly, the cordial greetings of Shou Chu Gong and Dao De came from Li Fan's mind. At this moment, Li Fan was surprised to find that even under the influence of the Xuanji rings, uniting hearts and morals, his meeting with his past self's memories had still gone unnoticed by others. This indicates that the past Li Fan's strength was far above that of the three sages. Even if only a simple stack of memories remained, he could disregard the Xuanji Ring's uniting hearts rule. Li Fan was not too surprised by this. After all, no matter how strong the three sages were, even in their peak state when mountain and sea had not yet been severed, they only cultivated within mountain and sea. But Li Fan had accumulated countless reincarnations of mountain and sea. It's called uniting hearts and morals, but I can now unilaterally block certain memories. I can deceive others, but others cannot deceive me. Doesn't this naturally give me an advantage? In an instant, Li Fan's eyes narrowed as he thought of this point. However, in the current situation, there's no need to hide anything from Shouchu and Daoda. After a brief moment of contemplation, Li Fan decided to share his recent experience with them. A moment later, Shouchu exclaimed, I originally thought that fellow Taoist Fan carrying Huan Zhen and starting over multiple times was already strange enough. But I never expected an even more convoluted past. It turns out mountain and sea has already been destroyed who knows how many cycles. Having fellow Taoist Fan truly is the fortune of mountain and sea. Daoda was also momentarily speechless with shock. To be able to unite hearts and morals with fellow Taoist Fan, we can die without regrets. Li Fan snorted, I don't think much of it. If he had truly succeeded in saving mountain and sea, then no amount of praise would be too much. But since he always ended in failure, what's the difference between repeating countless times and repeating once? Shouchu and Daoda smiled bitterly at his words, momentarily unsure how to respond. Alright, let's not dwell on the past for now. I truly need your help to make a judgment right now. There are a few questions still in my mind. First, even though it's been confirmed, I still have doubts. Is my past self truly gone? Or is it a certain thought or belief he imposed on me? Could he still have left some hidden move on me to counter me after I successfully save mountain and sea? Second, the source of my keen intuition has finally been answered. But the origin of infinite spirituality remains unknown. I only vaguely feel that my former self was not puzzled by this matter. Therefore, he did not enlighten me. Is infinite spirituality truly infinite? Or is it the accumulation of my former self's countless reincarnations? As for the third point, what does save yourself before saving the world mean? Li Fan spoke fluently, expressing all the doubts in his heart in one breath. He was open and honest, without any trace of peculiarity. This was him, even if it was his former self, no matter how great, noble, or sacred the other party appeared to be, he would never easily trust anyone. What needed to be doubted, he would always doubt. Under the shroud of the uniting hearts and morals rule, Shouchu Gong and Daoda already knew Li Fan's character. They were not surprised, but instead began to ponder seriously. After a long while, Shouchu Gong slowly spoke, regarding the first point, my judgment is consistent with Daoda's. The past fellow Taoist Fan should indeed no longer exist. Exhausting all possibilities, finding no way out. Only by going all in, severing the old self, and creating a new life, like restarting the creation of heaven and earth, can there be a glimmer of possibility. This act is to seek possibility in the impossible. If there were still some so-called hidden moves left, causing the crucial moment to fall short, and all past efforts to be in vain. Wouldn't that be a waste of time? With the past fellow Taoist Fan's foresight and hard nature, he would never make such a meaningless move. Li Fan nodded slightly. Of course, he didn't entirely believe Shouchu's words. Even he himself had doubts, let alone Shouchu. If he could be influenced by his past self, why couldn't Shouchu, who was united in hearts and morals, be influenced too? It was just for temporary comfort for now. Shouchu naturally understood this principle and quickly moved on, focusing on Li Fan's second question, regarding the origin of infinite spirituality. I currently have two conjectures. First, it is a characteristic that came with fellow Taoists' transmigration, an innate quality. It is precisely because of this characteristic that the past fellow Taoist Fan could have such admirable experiences. Otherwise, a mere living being born within mountain and sea, wanting to escape the reincarnation of mountain and sea, even the three sages probably couldn't do it. As for the second conjecture, it stems from what you said, that your deceased self had no doubts about the origin of infinite spirituality. If it came from transmigration, he would definitely not understand its cause. Unless he knew certain memories that you are unaware of. Originating from the time of transmigration, he witnessed the origin of infinite spirituality. Given his character, such an important matter would certainly not be hidden from you. Since he didn't say anything, then it should be taken as if there was none. Therefore, it can only be inferred that infinite spirituality might have come from his accumulation over countless reincarnations. Shochu seemed to see Li Fan repeatedly turning the tide and attempting to save mountain and sea. However, after every failure, he would regroup and start anew. He couldn't help but show admiration, while also yearning for it. It's not just his own accumulation. Or perhaps, it also includes the entire mountain and sea. Dao De interjected. Oh, how do you explain that? Li Fan asked. When mountain and sea perishes, true spirits accumulate. Mountain and sea is resurrected from nothingness by the great path of truth and falsehood. What happens to those accumulated true spirits is still unknown. If they return to a new mountain and sea, then this conjecture naturally doesn't hold. If mountain and sea reappears, and it doesn't rely on the true spirits of the past, then perhaps it can explain where the infinite true spirit in fellow Taoist comes from. Those are the remnants of the past mountain and sea from countless reincarnations. Dao De said, word by word. 1754. Sudden Enlightenment of Salvation. Chapter 1740. Epiphany of World-Saving Method. After the destruction of mountain and sea, only the accumulated true spirits remained in the void realm. When we crossed against the current, we all witnessed the boundless and infinite quantity of these true spirits. And this is merely a tiny fraction of mountain and sea's long life across a single reincarnation. What about the accumulation over hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of reincarnations? It would likely be unimaginable, like infinity. Dao De slowly voiced his conjecture. Li Fan instantly recalled his previous life, where he remained conscious for a period after activating Huan Zhen. He then noticed that his infinite spirituality seemed to be continuously consumed during this process. He instinctively retorted, the reappearance of mountain and sea requires true spirits as a medium. The accumulated true spirits were likely used to reshape mountain and sea with the activation of Huan Zhen. My previous experience is the best proof. Facing Li Fan's confident words, Shochu and Dao De pondered in silence for a while, then seemed to recall something and smiled wordlessly. What are you two laughing at? Li Fan was initially puzzled, but after sensing their thoughts, his expression also became somewhat strange. Ignoring that Li Fan already knew, Shochu still shook his head and said, fellow Taoist fan, the reason you felt your true spirit being consumed was because you grew increasingly fatigued during the crossing. Is it possible that, besides the weakness caused by extraction, absorbing a large amount of mountain and sea's accumulated true spirits, to the point of exceeding one's physical limits, could also produce a similar sensation? Shochu and Dao De both stared at Li Fan. Otherwise, with your foundation of infinite true spirits, if they were truly depleted, how could you recover so easily? Moreover, the great path of truth and falsehood and supreme divine abilities. Why would reshaping mountain and sea still require the so-called accumulated true spirits? The descent of the lone star will inevitably devour all things. Even the void realm and accumulated true spirits are no exception. The process of Huan Zhen activating and crossing to the end of time is also a process of collecting true spirits. With your current strength, it would certainly be difficult to withstand invisibly receiving such a quantity of true spirits in a short period. Li Fan instinctively frowned and retorted, nonsense, how could I not distinguish between being overfed and starving to death? As for the great path of truth and falsehood. He paused, and Li Fan actually felt that what the other party said made some sense. But out of his inherent suspicion, Li Fan quickly dismissed this sense of agreement. Squinting his eyes, Li Fan sized up Shochu and Dao De, subtly regaining his composure. Because the past Li Fan and his current self were essentially the same person, Shochu and Dao De, being of one mind with him, did not treat him as an outsider. Coupled with the noble existence he displayed, Shochu and Dao De always inferred all of the past Li Fan's actions with the utmost benevolence and compassion. This point was completely opposite to Li Fan. After realizing this, Li Fan did not choose to continue arguing. This matter is not difficult to verify. The next time Huan Zhen is activated, I will just open my eyes wide and see. This current world has undergone the baptism of the three saints for hundreds of billions of years, and I have witnessed countless reincarnations of mountain and sea. My endurance has reached another level. I will certainly not be as muddled as in the previous life, Li Fan said in a deep voice. Shochu and Dao De both nodded. The three tacitly moved on, no longer dwelling on the matter. Then let's talk about saving the world by first saving oneself. These 5 words were clearly the past Li Fan's instruction to his present self. And there was no special mystery, it was just the literal meaning. If you want to save mountain and sea, then save yourself first. Fellow Taoist fan, in the past, he cared deeply about mountain and sea. In order to save the world, he would often lean more towards mountain and sea when making choices between himself and mountain and sea. As the saying goes, a leopard cannot change its spots. With his noble character, even after countless reincarnations, there are likely some things he would never do. This also means that mountain and sea has undergone countless reincarnations, not all possibilities. Perhaps the lifeline lies with fellow Taoist fan now. Shou Chu Gong commented. No matter how much you try to turn the tide, you ultimately cannot prevent the descent of the lone star. To save mountain and sea, one must contend with the star, or even defeat it. But, after a long period of silent contemplation, Dao De continued. Trying to contend with the star while maintaining the existence of mountain and sea might inherently be an impossible task. Mountain and sea performs a divided soul, and then returns to the star. We cultivators originate from mountain and sea. To try to escape our own origins, while simultaneously saving mountain and sea and contending with the star, even a true god back then might not have been able to do it. Dao De's words, however, gave Li Fan an epiphany. Like a bolt of lightning, he suddenly understood in his heart, mountain and sea and the star, one waxes and the other wanes. To prevent mountain and sea from returning to the star, either return to the beginning of the divided soul and replace it, or, before the star devours mountain and sea, take a step ahead and bring mountain and sea into my grasp. Mountain and sea is gone, but I remain. And then I face the star. Is this what is meant by saving the world by first saving oneself? A strange glint flashed in Li Fan's eyes. Vaguely perceiving the countless fleeting images in Li Fan's mind, and his throbbing emotions, Shou Chu and Dao De neither voiced agreement nor opposition. They just remained silent, putting aside whether he could truly contend with the star even after devouring mountain and sea. Even if Li Fan truly won, what Li Fan would become after devouring mountain and sea and destroying the lone star was already completely beyond the realm of imagination. And how could one be sure that he would ultimately still choose to save the world? It was incalculable, unknowable, and there was nothing they could do. However, after countless failed reincarnation attempts, it was the only option left when there was no other way. At this moment, Shou Chu and Dao De could faintly feel how conflicted Li Fan must have been when he made such a choice back then. Li Fan naturally sensed the thoughts of the other two. He chuckled, you two are thinking even further ahead than I am. Devouring mountain and sea, snatching food from the star's mouth, how could it be so easy to devour? Don't even mention the star. I can't even get past the three saints, or even the saints from the beginning of mountain and sea, at present. Am I to assume that if I act to devour under the guise of saving the world, they will obediently accept their fate? That only Li Fan can do it, but I cannot. In the end, it still comes down to cultivation. It must be said that Li Fan's words were extremely reasonable. Shou Chu and Dao De thought it over carefully again, and somewhat came to their senses, sighing, it is because we observed what fellow Taoist fan did in the past, and from our hearts, we spontaneously believed that fellow Taoist fan is the sole savior of mountain and sea. We believe unconditionally that even if you were to devour mountain and sea, we would support you. As for others, they certainly won't be like us. Unless we bring all Zhongsheng of mountain and sea into the Xuanji ring, sharing the same mind and heart. Shou Chu suddenly blurted out. Even Li Fan's heart skipped a beat at the sound of these words. With his temperament, he would normally never share his inner thoughts with others. But by chance, he had his first attempt. After tasting the sweetness and realizing there was no harm to himself, he repeatedly did so. However, the three of them being of one mind was already the limit Li Fan could accept at present. As for something like Shou Chu's idea of opening his heart to all living beings of mountain and sea, he had never even considered it. As fellow Taoist Shou Chu being a bit too extreme. There are hundreds of millions of living beings, and too many variables, Li Fan said in a muffled voice. Shou Chu, however, did not give up on his idea. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. The nobler one's character, the more one can perceive the greatness of the past fellow Taoist fan. I believe that even ordinary living beings in mountain and sea, after experiencing everything that happened in the past mountain and sea, should be able to understand and then make the correct choice. As for those who are stubborn, they cannot obstruct the general trend. Dao De also added heavily, thinking about it carefully, it is indeed feasible. Shou Chu continued, if not for the shackles of the three saints Xuanji ring, how could the saints of mountain and sea work together with one heart? Our plan is merely to emulate the story of the three saints. However, the scale of the concentric ring we wish to create will be far beyond the Xuanji ring. Our hopes are also far beyond the three saints. If there isn't a larger concentric ring encompassing mountain and sea, how will Zhongsheng of mountain and sea unite their hearts for their own survival? Shouchu and Doubda looked at Li Fan with burning eyes. Their eyes were filled with undisguised fanaticism. Li Fan naturally knew that this fanaticism was not directed at him. Rather, under the influence of their shared mind and heart, it was directed at the past world-saving saint. In a sense, my past self's actions infinitely approached the ideal self in the minds of Shouchu and Doubda. Though they couldn't reach it, their hearts yearned for it. And under the effect of the Xuanji ring, they experienced it firsthand. Naturally, they would recognize it even more infinitely. The short-term changes in Shouchu and Doubda were quite peculiar. In reality, it was also within reason. Ultimately, it was because the former Li Fan was simply too powerful. The things he did were too legendary. Even after his death and the dissipation of his thoughts, his past deeds alone could command and influence the saints. But what does that matter? The survival of mountain and sea still depends on me now, Li Fan snorted coldly in his heart. Thinking about it carefully, Shouchu and Doubda's plan might actually be feasible. However, it needs to be planned for the long term. The great Tao of returning to Truth Hall, thief of opportunities, Suo, mountain and sea's wondrous fortune. In Li Fan's mind, myriad thoughts evolved and changed. The saints were working together diligently, striving to reunite and save mountain and sea from the coercion of the Void Realm army. Yet, they were completely unaware that three, and very important three, of the saints within their own ranks had quietly undergone a change. Although he already had a rough plan, Li Fan dared not reveal a single detail. He knew very well that if he exposed his inner thoughts and intentions in any way other than through their shared mind and heart, he would immediately become the public enemy of mountain and sea. His countless accumulated memories from his past self would also become treasures in the eyes of others. His strength was still far from sufficient to execute the plan, he needed to continue to lie low. However, perhaps I can start considering adding more people to the shared mind and heart. After witnessing the changes in Shouchu and Doubda, Li Fan looked at Mo Yong, who had not yet become a saint, and thoughtfully said, "Choosing people must be done with caution. Like Shouchu and Doubda, spontaneously caring about mountain and sea is the minimum requirement. It's best if they have fought alongside my past self and their character has already been proven." From all aspects, Mo Yong was undoubtedly an extremely suitable candidate. Being able to leave Li Fan with vague memories, Mo Yong was naturally not simple. He could be said to be a loyal follower and comrade of the former Li Fan, inseparable in life and death. He attained Tao through song, his ethereal voice echoing through the broken mountain and sea, inspiring and invigorating Tao heart. This allowed the saints, even in desperate circumstances, to never give up and fight valiantly. Although Mo Yong had not yet become a saint, with Li Fan's assistance, it was already a foregone conclusion. The only trouble is that the principle of shared mind and heart originates from the three saints' Xuanji ring. Those who are truly of one mind are only the first three saints to take their seats. Other newcomers can at most only be subtly influenced. The three saints can be one entity. But there is a natural gap between them and other living beings in mountain and sea, so it's impossible for them to truly be of one mind. But I am different. To be foolproof, the chosen person must truly be of one mind with me. A cold light flashed in Li Fan's eyes. The Xuanji ring is exceptionally profound. When it was initially deciphered, it was already extremely difficult. Now, to try to change it on its foundation. It cannot be done without understanding its principles. Li Fan was not confused by his past self. He still had a very clear understanding of his own strength. With my current comprehension of the Xuanji ring, even with Shouchu and Doubda, it might not be possible to add another person to the Xuanji ring. He who tied the bell must untie it. To achieve the goal, it still depends on the three saints. But how to secretly push it forward? Li Fan looked at mountain and sea, where the situation was becoming increasingly critical under the looming clouds of the Void Realm. A rough idea immediately formed in his mind. But I cannot be hasty, lest I reveal any clues. Compared to my past self, the number of reincarnations I've experienced is negligible. I can take my time. Once he understood the truth of Huan Zhen, his worry about it leaving him at any time also disappeared. He could then plan everything more steadily. Knowledge and action are one. What Li Fan did was exactly as he thought. In mountain and sea, he continued to seek out and enlighten saints. In addition to the 3 from the Holy Dynasty, he found 2 more promising talents. He spared no true spirits, doing his best to infuse them. In fact, compared to his past perfunctory efforts, Li Fan was now even more serious and dedicated. Because in his view, these newly promoted saints were very likely to be his allies in the future. While infusing true spirits, Li Fan was also comprehending the so-called true spirits he was mobilizing. With the memories of his past self, his understanding of them was quietly changing. Accumulated true spirits are the remnants after the destruction of mountain and sea. And mountain and sea originated from God. In a sense, this is also the fundamental reason why humans can achieve immortal ascension and become saints. Accumulated true spirits and the true spirits inherent in living beings are essentially no different. Which means, the Tao annihilation disaster of the void realm has no effect on true spirits themselves. Only when the lone star appears can they be erased. However, are they erased, or absorbed? Li Fan recalled the scene he witnessed back then, pondering to himself. He once had the idea of releasing all the true spirits hidden within his body. Huan Zhen, upon sensing it, immediately displayed an unprecedented warning. Theoretically, even if mountain and sea collapses, it can be restored with a single thought through the change of truth and falsehood. Which means, the true spirit torrent can even affect Huan Zhen's reshaping of mountain and sea. Recommending a book, a new work by the great god Yan Zk, extremely good. Demons, Immortals, Monsters, Zhonggu. In the tavern, a Hu woman bartender smiled and avoided someone's hand, her tail wagging beneath her skirt. In the night market, it was hard to tell how many were human and how many were ghosts under the hoods. Fierce tigers roamed the mountains, and old dragons slept in Dongting Lake. A sword, a person, a scroll. The path is ahead, the Tao is in the heart, and the sword is in hand. Slaying demons and devils, immortals and gods retreat. True monarch arrives, nothing is taboo. 1755, when the 3 saints died. Reshaping mountain and sea relies entirely on the change of truth and falsehood. The change of truth and falsehood is not merely a great path, but the saying, false is true when true is false. True is false is to erase the star's influence. False is true is to recreate mountain and sea from a realm of destruction and nothingness. Life and death, existence and non-existence, reality and void. It all depends on a single thought. Thoughts churned in Li Fan's mind. As his thoughts moved, a phantom figure suddenly materialized before him. However, it was only a silhouette, its face indistinct. With my current understanding of the great path of truth and falsehood, it might still be difficult to create living beings out of thin air. But if it's just an inanimate object... Li Fan waved his hand, and the phantom of the unformed living being dissipated, replaced by an ordinary tree branch. It had no special energy fluctuations, it was purely a piece of common wood. Yet, because Li Fan created it out of thin air, it possessed a certain extraordinary significance. Li Fan had been able to perform false as true creation out of thin air long ago. For example, he once created the essence ancient azure origin for D. Sanmo to jump between possibilities. But false as true creations were extremely unstable and could not last for too long. As Li Fan's comprehension of the great path of truth and falsehood deepened, the duration for which false as true creations could last also continuously increased. The tree branch Li Fan had just created, if undisturbed by other external forces, could now safely exist for 100 years. A short section of the tree branch continuously appeared and disappeared. Li Fan ceaselessly comprehended the process of truth and falsehood transforming. After a long time, he finally confirmed one point. Indeed, this process does not involve the consumption of true spirit. Then what exactly does reshaping mountain and sea have to do with true spirit? Li Fan looked up and gazed into the distance, his gaze seemingly passing through layers of void realm, reaching directly to mountains and sea's end. He recalled the various aspects of mountain and sea in the void realm he had encountered along the way. If the true spirit torrent were to pour out from within me, the great path of truth and falsehood would naturally not be affected by it. The only thing that might change because of it is the star. Li Fan suddenly had an epiphany. Even the corpses left behind from mountain and sea's countless reincarnations can still be swallowed by the star and transformed into its energy. My past self may have perished, but the star could potentially grow stronger because of it. One wanes, the other waxes. Before his eyes, it was as if a lone star suddenly leapt out of the darkness, its destructive light even more dazzling than what he had seen in the past. Li Fan's heart couldn't help but pound. He vaguely began to understand the true meaning of the phrase, "It can block the star for a time, but not for an eternity." Not only do I have to save people, but I also have to deal with the aftermath. Being a savior like this is really not easy. To be honest, Li Fan had no interest in becoming the savior of mountain and sea. But he was very interested in devouring mountains and seas and achieving the supreme Tao. As for whether Li Fan, after succeeding in being unconstrained by anyone, would still be willing to save mountain and sea, even if it was just a simple task, that would depend on his mood. While nurturing ordinary talents, Li Fan also participated in several battles between the mountain and sea saints and the Void Realm army. Even so, the saints' side still inevitably fell into a disadvantage. Just as they had analyzed before, the Void Realm could continuously draw upon power from other time periods. With the power capable of besieging a complete mountain and sea, it could naturally easily suppress a single, fragmented mountain and sea. Not to mention the continuously increasing number of Void Realm incarnations, which eventually reached 36. The constantly overlapping Tao annihilation dark clouds also seemed to reach a qualitative change after a long accumulation. Even though mountain and sea had not yet been swallowed by Tao annihilation, it seemed as if a shadow had suddenly been cast over it as a whole. Various colors in mountain and sea slowly faded, and the vibrant world gradually turned black and white. What happened? Why do I feel like everything around me has become ethereal? Bai Xiao's divine thought incarnation, who had crossed over to provide support, continuously flickered, its emitted light growing fainter and fainter. It was like a book from which pages were gradually torn away, slowly leaving only a thin leaf. Not only Bai Xiao, but the divine thought incarnations of the other saints, including the 3 saints, also could not escape this change. This feeling, it's as if we are inside the Void Realm, not in mountain and sea. Our own existence is melting away like ice and snow. Although the Void Realm has not completed its erosion of mountain and sea, the heavy encirclement has caused the power of nothingness to permeate in advance. If this continues, mountain and sea might not last much longer. In that instant, the Void Realm's power piled up outside mountain and sea surged again, doubling. It was dim and profound, swallowing everything. Even the radiant light of the 3 saints might not be able to illuminate it. The saints felt the changes in mountain and sea, and their expressions were all extremely solemn. They looked at the 3 saints, awaiting their decision. Strange, the Void Realm's reaction. Something is wrong. Both Gui Hai Saint of the current timeline and the Divine Thought incarnations who had crossed over from later mountain and sea frowned. Looking at the sky, countless light and shadow images seemed to emerge before their eyes. Even with the Void Realm obstructing, their deductions were difficult to sever. The constantly flickering images became the only color in the black and white mountain and sea at this moment. Something has happened in the beginning of mountain and sea. Saint's demise, chaos, turmoil. Mountain and sea's resistance has been greatly weakened, allowing the Void Realm to draw more power here. Gui Hai's deduction took more time than usual, and perhaps due to the Void Realm's obstruction, the consumption also became enormous. A white hair even appeared on Gui Hai Saint's head because of it. But he paid no attention to this, instead attempting to continue his deduction. Lianshan and Tai saints also joined in with extreme tacit understanding. The 3 saints sat cross-legged, their 7-colored rainbow light flickering, revealing some clear images. Although it was just a fleeting glimpse, the saints could clearly see who the fallen saint in the beginning of mountain and sea was. It was precisely Suo, who had just retreated from this segment of mountain and sea. He actually died. All the saints were astonished. And at this moment, as if sensing the 3 saints' trans-temporal prying, dozens of malicious gazes simultaneously emanated from the light and shadow. Like hungry vicious beasts looking at lambs they could gorge on. The 3 saints reacted extremely quickly, stopping their deduction before the gazes could spread. Even so, streaks of malevolence, following the subtle connection, diffused into the Xuanji. Taking on physical form, roar. Some resembled vicious beasts, some were like ghostly specters, and others were like grinning skeletons. Although their strength was incomparably weaker than that of the saints present, they still ferociously roared and charged at the saints. The result was obvious. They were easily annihilated by the saints. But the saints' expressions did not ease in the slightest because of this. Instead, they became even more solemn. Especially the 3 saints. We just felt dozens of gazes, but none of them were our own. We are no longer within the Taichu immortal realm, Lianshan Saint said with a serious expression. Could it be that the 3 saints also perished together? Li Fan asked in surprise. Not so. Not only us, but also some old friends have all disappeared without a trace. It seems. The time for divided soul has arrived. After the three saints finished speaking, they exchanged glances. Then, as if by prior agreement, their figures transformed into streaks of flowing light and faded away. In an instant, they perished on the spot, leaving behind a dumbfounded crowd. 1756. All Saints' Day. Chapter 1742. The True Nature of the Saints. The sudden change happened too quickly. Even Li Fan couldn't react in time. The leaders of the saints, the general overseers of the reunited mountain and sea, the three saints Lianshan, Guihai, and Tai, had fallen without any warning. And they had done so by their own hands. How could this be? Not only the three saints in the current time period of mountain and sea, but also the three saints in the later era of mountain and sea, where Li Fan's true body resided, chose to fall decisively after sensing the anomaly. As the main orchestrators perished, the white light of the Xuanji ring slowly dimmed. The expressions of the saints gradually underwent subtle changes. Within the other shore, the atmosphere began to turn eerie. One heart, one virtue. Li Fan made a swift decision, signaling Shouchu and Dao to act. Before the saints could be fully overcome by their original hard nature, Li Fan and the two others took the positions previously held by the three saints. The Xuanji ring's radiance brightened once more, and the deepening dark clouds instantly dispersed. The saints were once again influenced by one heart, one virtue. However, Li Fan, Shouchu, and Dao were ultimately not Lianshan, Guihai, and Tai. The saints' hard nature had already become somewhat different. What a set of three saints! They kept talking about reuniting and saving mountain and sea, but at the crucial moment, they ran faster than anyone. It can't be considered running, rather, it's adding another bargaining chip to the mountain and sea divided soul. Although the recent events were bizarre, the saints, having witnessed much in the past, had all reacted by now. In the Taichu Immortal realm, the saints were absent. The divided soul period had arrived. It seemed that all the saints from the beginning of mountain and sea had participated in that grand drama of the mountain and sea divided soul. And the three saints all possessed the divine ability of primordial undying. Primordial unity, eternally indestructible. If all three saints across all time and space were to perish, with only one instance surviving, then the power of these last surviving three saints would return to their peak state. To gain an advantage in this great battle, the three saints decisively chose to let their counterparts in all other time and space perish, concentrating all their power at the beginning of mountain and sea. What a pity, the mountain and sea divided soul. Such an exciting scene, yet we are fated not to see it. And furthermore, Bai Xiao sighed deeply, looking beyond mountain and sea. The existence of the three saints could be called the pillars of mountain and sea. Now that they had suddenly vanished, the already precarious situation of mountain and sea became even more fragile. In various parts of mountain and sea, many possibilities seemed to be frozen, losing their vitality. Everything had fallen into a state of stillness and ice, as if ready to shatter and break into countless fragments at any moment. The remaining worlds, still surviving, also seemed to have slowed down by 10,000 times, with everything within them becoming extremely sluggish. This was a sign of further existential decline. Their origin existence was no longer sufficient to support their continued evolution. They could only slowly dry up, like a stream whose upstream had withered. If mountain and sea perishes, besieged by the void realm, we will likely have nowhere to escape. Without the three saints' gaze penetrating the void realm to point out the correct direction, and without the three saints standing like lighthouses to guide the way forward. Even with Li Fan's true spirit continuously infusing, the saints would likely find it difficult to navigate through the layers of the void realm. The saints were all well aware of this point. When Bai Xiao spoke, no one refuted him. What if the three saints are gone? If we work together, we might still be able to forge a path to survival. With the future dim and uncertain, Li Fan suddenly spoke at this moment. His bold words showed no trace of panic. Fellow Taoist Zhou Wei, do you have any good strategies? Influenced by one heart, one virtue, and the subjective impression created by the continuous true spirit infusion Li Fan had given the saints earlier. Li Fan's position in the saints' hearts, though not as weighty as the three saints, was absolutely that of a backbone. Li Fan's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze flickering as he said, since mountain and sea has changed, our plans must change accordingly. In the past, the top priority was to reunite and save mountain and sea. But now, what we can do is just 3 words. Survive. Compared to the mission of saving mountain and sea forcibly imposed by the three saints, the goal of survival clearly aligned more with the saints' original hard nature. When Li Fan proposed this, none of the saints objected, They all nodded in agreement. Living beings can be used, mountain and sea can be used, everything can be used. The situation was critical, so Li Fan made his points concisely, directly sharing his plan with the saints. It was precisely the plan Shou Chu had proposed earlier. To rely on the spiritual veins of mountain and sea's living beings to stimulate their inherent potential. Things have come to this, we can't worry about too much. The three saints went to participate in the divided soul feast. Though we are not fated to join, we cannot let them gain benefits for free. Tell us, how should we proceed? The saints did not hesitate for a moment, they all agreed to Li Fan's plan. The reason mountain and sea has been indifferent to the threat of the void realm is that the void realm only devours the mountain and sea of the current time period, not the entirety of mountain and sea. With the vastness of mountain and sea, it can naturally remain indifferent to this loss. However, what if we spread this danger of mountain and sea's collapse throughout all parts of mountain and sea? Li Fan's words caused the saints' expressions to freeze. They had been so immersed in the idea of saving mountain and sea for so long that they had almost never come up with such a brilliant idea. Facing Li Fan's question, their minds were momentarily blank. It was Li Fan who pointed out the clear path. Everyone, don't forget, we previously traversed the void realm and completed mountain and sea shuttling by relying on the spiritual veins of mountain and sea's living beings. Similarly, we can now use these veins to go to other mountain and sea. Of course, what we need to do is not just leave ourselves. We need to bring the void realm's erosion to various places. The other shore, led by Li Fan and the two others, had extremely high execution efficiency. Before his words even faded, the Xuanji ring erupted with an intensely blazing light. It enveloped the entire fragile mountain and sea of the current time period. All the descendants evolved from Chu Tianhui's great Tao of living beings, still existing, were marked at that instant. The saints' intentions poured into it like surging rivers. A moment later, countless stars rose from the paper-thin mountain and sea, following the hidden veins of mountain and sea, heading to the past and future. And, just as Li Fan had requested, this time, the saints did not merely possess intentions, they also acted as guides, radiating their own light to point the way for the void realm. The hidden veins of mountain and sea were like underground tunnels spread throughout mountain and sea. Although the void realm devoured mountain and sea, it was unaware of their existence. But at this moment, beams of new light shone and ascended within the mountain and sea veins. And quickly transferred and shuttled between different mountain and sea. It was difficult for the void realm not to notice. Compared to eroding segment by segment, if it attacked along the mountain and sea veins hidden within, its efficiency would surely increase several times over. Without hesitation, the void realm immediately adjusted its attack deployment. Layers of Tao annihilation no longer universally devoured every part of mountain and sea. Instead, they primarily followed the flaws left by the saints, along the mountain and sea veins, beginning an all-pervasive invasion. With the mountain and sea veins diverting the flow, even with the large-scale invasion of Tao annihilation, the pressure on Li Fan and the others within the Xuanji ring was significantly reduced. 1757. Mountains and Seas in the Painting. Chapter 1743. Mountain and Sea enters the painting. Joyful, joyful. In the past, it was we who protected mountain and sea, but now mountain and sea has become our shield. This is truly karma cycling, a deserved retribution. Amidst the roaring laughter of the saints, mountain and sea had already been torn to shreds by the Tao annihilation torrent. Logically speaking, mountain and sea, having suffered such a degree of destruction, should have long ceased to exist. But there seemed to be a mysterious force secretly resisting the void realm's erosion, while simultaneously forcibly binding countless mountain and sea fragments together. This allowed mountain and sea to maintain a complete appearance. Li Fan's divine thought spread throughout mountain and sea, instantly locating the source of this sustaining force. As expected, it was precisely the pair of divine thoughts left behind by Chu Tianhui and her husband. As the great Tao of mountain and sea beings, a pivotal node from the beginning of mountain and sea to the end of time, this couple formed from divine thoughts were not truly living beings but rather conceptual concretions. Normally, they were unaware of this themselves, but now that mountain and sea faced the danger of destruction, the couple instinctively looked up at the sky. Then, their expressions gradually became blank. Their figures seemed to be in rapid vibration, and with each fluctuation, a living being's shadow detached, transforming into a speck of light, drifting towards the sky. The specks of light did not give birth to living beings, but instead flew to various parts of the shattered mountain and sea, like nourishing tonics. After mountain and sea absorbed them, the trend of fragmentation instantly slowed. Chu Tianwei and her husband truly left a trump card. This is using the power of living beings to nourish mountain and sea. It's like a potent medicine for the dying, perhaps a final burst of vitality, but ultimately it cannot save mountain and sea. The saints understood clearly and continued to stand by. At the same time, the vast majority of their attention was still focused on the hidden Mailuo pulse veins of mountain and sea. As the Tao annihilation torrent continued its erosion, mountain and sea's instinctive reaction finally arrived. Its intensity, however, somewhat exceeded the saints' imagination. In various parts of mountain and sea, it was as if a great wind suddenly arose. Those remaining possibilities, which had been barely holding on under the Tao annihilation's impact, were instantly plunged into a terrifying vortex as this wind swept through mountain and sea's interior. Countless possibilities were annihilated, transforming into the purest power of mountain and sea. Living beings, civilizations, possibilities, Tao paths. Everything that existed within mountain and sea returned to nothingness in this vast storm. What remained was only mountain and sea itself. Extremely pure, and extremely powerful. It was as if it had returned to its state after the initial divided soul, where mountain and sea was simply mountain and sea. Boom, boom, boom. Loud crashing sounds echoed from all over mountain and sea, and several torrents shot into the sky. It turned out that the Tao annihilation torrents that had previously entered the mountain and sea Mailuo pulse veins were forcibly repelled by the mighty power of mountain and sea. The enemy retreated, we advanced. An indescribably vast vitality flowed out from the mountain and sea Mailuo pulse veins. The shattered mountain and sea slowly began to recondense. Perhaps sensing the specific crisis situation outside, the newborn mountain and sea no longer evolved numerous possibilities. Nor did it reveal the rumored appearance of the Taichu immortal realm. Instead, it was like a stone carving, with all the myriad forms of mountain and sea carved within it. It lost its so-called change, but it exuded a different kind of majestic and solemn aura. When the Shanghai stone slab appeared, everything in mountain and sea seemed to be enveloped by its power, losing its vitality and becoming part of the carving on the slab. Even the saints within the Xuanji ring were not spared. The white light surrounding the Xuanji ring solidified and froze like ice. The power of stone transformation continued to erode inwards, irresistibly. Go. Seeing the unfavorable situation, Li Fan decisively chose to join the saints in controlling the Xuanji ring and fleeing into the void realm. Normally, they could arrive in an instant, but now, within the Shanghai stone slab, every step was difficult. An intuition told the saints that if they didn't leave now and stayed, their fate would likely be the same as mountain and sea itself, to be carved into stone. At the critical moment of life and death, they all unleashed their full potential. Various great Tao lights flashed, illuminating the Xuanji ring in a kaleidoscope of colors. They forcefully broke through the blockade of the stone-transformed mountain and sea, successfully fleeing into the void realm. Only a long line drawn by the Xuanji ring's surrounding light remained in the solidified mountain and sea. The saints, having escaped into the void realm, were still shaken and looked back. It was ironic to say, in the past, everyone avoided the Tao annihilation void realm. But at this moment, compared to the surging void realm, the stone-transformed mountain and sea was even more dangerous. At the very least, with the saints' strength, no matter how turbulent the Tao annihilation, they could still barely survive for a period of time. But facing this petrification of mountain and sea, if the saints had not fled, their fate would probably have been the same as everything else within mountain and sea. Mountain and sea had already completed its transformation, turning into a complete stone slab. Like an unyielding rock, no matter how the Tao annihilation waves crashed, it remained utterly motionless. One could vaguely discern the final scenes within mountain and sea from the patterns on the stone slab. It was just that vitality was no more, and the future was no more. Mountain and sea would forever remain at this moment. Tai Wei, fellow Taoist. As the saints were silently lost in thought, Shouchu's cry of alarm made their hearts leap again. Following Shouchu's gaze, they saw the majestic figure of Tai Wei's sacred emperor, carved onto the firmament of mountain and sea. Like a brilliant great sun, he protected the people of the Holy Dynasty, attempting to resist the sudden disaster of mountain and sea's anomaly. Although Tai Wei's sacred emperor was petrified, his expression was still clearly visible. He looked up at the sky, standing with his hands behind his back, without a trace of fear. It was only regrettable that the saint's strength was insufficient to withstand this calamity of mountain and sea's petrification. Not only did he fail to save the holy dynasty's people, but he himself was buried along with them. Foolish. Why didn't Tai Wei fellow Taoist run? It's not that he couldn't, but that he wouldn't. Tai Wei's entire foundation lay in the vast holy dynasty. Now that the holy dynasty is gone, and its people are gone, even if he could barely escape, his strength would surely be less than 1%. Rather than becoming nourishment for others, it's better to end himself here. What does Gui Ming fellow Taoist mean by that? Heh. The petrification of mountain and sea and the demise of Tai Wei, under these various stimuli, brought the saints one step closer to restoring their original nature. Li Fan, however, didn't care much. He had already formed a pact of unity with Shouchu and Daoda, making it easy to suppress the other saints. At this moment, his gaze was fixed intently on the Shanhai stone slab before him. This stone slab gave him the exact same feeling as the mountain and sea boundless steel. On the mountain and sea boundless steel, various great Tao traces were engraved. And the slightly raised lines on the Shanhai stone slab also corresponded precisely to the various Tao principles within mountain and sea. If I could absorb this stone slab, it would be like devouring all the myriad great Tao of mountain and sea. Such a thought suddenly emerged in Li Fan's mind. But after witnessing the collision between the Void Realm and the Shanhai stone slab, he instantly abandoned this idea. The Tao annihilation power that had originally infiltrated the mountain and sea Mai Luo pulsed veins was not only repelled, but even the parts of mountain and sea that the Void Realm had previously swallowed returned to mountain and sea's control as the petrification progressed. What the Shanhai stone slab displayed was not a fragmented, pitted landscape eroded by the Void Realm, but a complete picture. At the cost of its own vitality, it caused the Void Realm's accumulated aggression of countless years to be lost in an instant. And facing the Shanhai stone slab, the Tao annihilation giant waves, and even the Void Realm incarnation, all desired to re-enter. But the stone slab was a seamless whole, unmoving. While connecting the disconnected mountain and sea in some mysterious way, it also completely concealed the mountain and sea Mai Luo pulsed veins. 1758. Mountains and seas can no longer survive. The petrification of mountain and sea is like drinking poison to quench thirst. Although it temporarily cuts off the possibility of Tao annihilation's invasion, it also means that this mountain and sea. Li Fan gazed at the Shanhai stone slab in front of him, feeling as if he were facing an ancient tomb. It was ancient and solemn, filled with death qi. It blocked the attack of the Void Realm, but also cut off its own future. This is mountain and sea's delaying tactic. Tao annihilation invades through the mountain and sea Mai Luo, like poison entering blood vessels. Mountain and sea's active petrification, though it can avoid the invasion of toxins for a short time, is harmful rather than beneficial to the overall mountain and sea. It can even be said that its harmfulness is no less than being swallowed by the Void Realm. Otherwise, facing the large-scale invasion of Tao annihilation, mountain and sea could have chosen to petrify completely long ago. Li Fan's divine thought swept over the petrified mountain and sea, generating various thoughts. He keenly noticed that the Shanhai stone slab was slowly expanding its scope as time passed. Its growth rate was slow, but incredibly resolute. Thus, he realized, this process is irreversible. Once initiated, eventually all of mountain and sea will become a single stone slab. It can force back the Void Realm's invasion, but it still cannot stop the descent of the star. The day the transformation of mountain and sea is complete will be the moment the lone star appears. Ultimately, the divided soul of mountain and sea is for inheriting the power of God. And this stone slab before us, though it contains the 100 Tao of mountain and sea, it is not qualified to be called a open black lens bracket God close black lens bracket. Shouchu sensed Li Fan's thoughts and also transmitted his voice with a sigh. In the past, I sat overlooking the mountains and seas, deeply feeling my own insignificance and the vastness of mountain and sea, hence I gained various insights. However, now facing this petrified mountain and sea, no insights emerge. Its domain is vast, its Tao is profound. But ultimately it is of no benefit to living beings. Daoda also agreed. Since we can all sense this, mountain and sea naturally knows it too. Sacrificing the future for a temporary delay. It seems a great change has truly occurred in the beginning of mountain and sea. What the three saints said before was, the time for divided soul has come, not, mountain and sea divided soul. It undoubtedly means that the saints of the beginning of mountain and sea wanted to contend with mountain and sea for the fortune of divided soul. If mountain and sea had not been the one to undergo divided soul back then mountain and sea would not exist today. Everything after the evolution of mountain and sea is at stake, so they must fight desperately. Mountain and Sea's action is probably also out of helplessness. It has to face the Dao Tai saints, and also preserve itself under the strong attack of Dao annihilation, Li Fan sneered. Saints contending with Mountain and Sea for godhood. Just thinking about it is exciting. It's a pity we are not destined to participate in this grand event. However, fellow Taoist fan, why have you not seen this change in your previous few lives? Dao Da asked. The origin of this anomaly probably still lies with open black lens bracket suo close black lens bracket. Li Fan looked at the ancient character on the Grand Dao Hall that was no longer struggling. Part of its essence was devoured by my thief of opportunities Dao. The strength of Suo must have greatly diminished. Taichu Immortal realm is full of ruthless people. Suo's abnormality will inevitably be discovered by others. It might become someone else's meal. Perhaps it was the fuse for the divided soul. Li Fan frowned, trying to deduce something. But he knew too little about Taichu Immortal realm. Ultimately, he gained nothing. However, it can be inferred that the saints of the beginning of Mountain and Sea were actually only one step away from performing the divided soul act. With a little help, they could cross that imperceptible limit. The three of them communicated in secret. And after witnessing the petrification of Mountain and Sea, the Void Realm also withdrew its heavy encirclement. Although it was still pitch black, in the eyes of Li Fan and the others, it had become much brighter. This section of Mountain and Sea no longer had any value for swallowing, and the crisis resolved itself. This change was something they had never expected before. The act of diverting disaster to others caused an unexpected reaction from Mountain and Sea, achieving the same ultimate effect. The petrification of Mountain and Sea is like a giant rock blocking the way. The act of reunion has also become meaningless. Li Fan and the others returned to the still normal Mountain and Sea of later generations, sitting inside the Xuanji ring. The other saints, due to the prolonged disappearance of their goal, became somewhat lost for a time. We are now like a small boat on a river. Whether the ship sinks or not is decided by others. Fate is not in our hands, it's really unpleasant. Bai Xiao sighed. If it were still Mountain and Sea divided soul, then it wouldn't matter. I'm just afraid that another saint has occupied Mountain and Sea's original path. We are all born from Mountain and Sea. If Mountain and Sea didn't exist from the beginning, wouldn't we also perish with it? Gui Ming's concern was not unreasonable. After the departure of the three saints, an uncontainable unease had emerged in the hearts of all the saints. Originally, they thought it was due to the Void Realm's erosion, but now, as the Dao annihilation tide receded, this unease not only did not disappear but intensified. It was as if a great disaster was imminent, and a catastrophe was approaching. Yet, apart from silently awaiting their fate, the saints seemed unable to do anything else. Even ants cling to life, are we just going to wait for death like this? Thief of Opportunities' eyes were filled with unwillingness. The beginning of Mountain and Sea. If only we had been a little faster earlier. Just as the saints were in a state of turmoil, Li Fan suddenly spoke, I do have a plan that might save you all from this calamity. It's just that I'm not entirely sure. Fellow Taoist Zhou Wei, please speak freely. The outcome of the divided soul determines our fate. The only way to avoid its influence is to jump outside of Mountain and Sea. Although we saints are said to be on par with Mountain and Sea, we are far from being independent of Mountain and Sea. Li Fan slowly said. Indeed, but we don't have much time left. The divided soul result will be revealed very soon. Jumping outside of Mountain and Sea, how can we do that before then? The saints were puzzled. If Mountain and Sea does not tolerate us, then we shall return to the Void Realm. Li Fan pointed to the darkness outside of Mountain and Sea. Over these years, I have continuously infused true spirit, accumulating true spirit deep within the Void Realm. With years of constant calling, I seem to have formed some inexplicable connection with the Void Realm. It's just that in the past, our goal was to reunite Mountain and Sea, so it was inconvenient to expose this. Times are different now, so telling you is fine. Having resisted the Void Realm Dao annihilation for so long, it had become an instinct. The saints were all startled at first upon hearing this. However, thinking of their current predicament, their serious and wary expressions slowly disappeared. Return to the Void Realm? Has fellow Taoist Zhou Wei truly tried it? In the Void Realm, all existence disappears. If we return, where will we go? Although they did not object, the saints' doubts ultimately remained. Li Fan said without batting an eye, although I have never truly tried it, I think there is a great possibility of success. Haven't you seen the Void Realm incarnations that previously besieged Mountain and Sea? Their forms are no different from true saints. If it can accommodate incarnations, then why can't it accommodate true saints? Li Fan said in a deep voice, we just need to try it. A great disaster is imminent, do you all have a better method? Although he said so, it was still not the most critical moment. The saints still had doubts. Until, mountain and sea instantly became ethereal. 1759, a new God comes. Chapter 1745, a new God descends upon the world. This ethereal void was fundamentally different from being swallowed by the void realm. When Tao annihilation invaded, mountain and sea as a whole still existed. It was intermittent, like a tree gnawed into 1,000 holes. As long as the great tree had not collapsed, the various saints who could move freely within mountain and sea could use their respective abilities to avoid the fallen areas, thereby maintaining their own survival. But the current void of mountain and sea was like a great fire that had started from the roots of the tree. The raging flames, from beginning to end, engulfed all of mountain and sea, and nothing could escape. Even if the saints hid within the void realm, it was merely a change of location. Their various connections with mountain and sea remained. That invisible fire would follow these subtle connections and bury the saints along with everything else. The battle of divided soul, mountain and sea actually lost. While the saints were shaken, a tremendous fear instinctively arose in their hearts. This was a premonition of their impending demise. As mountain and sea was engulfed, and a new God was crowned, everything that mountain and sea had gained from the God, and everything that living beings had gained from mountain and sea, would return. As long as one had not leapt out of mountain and sea, and the time point was after the divided soul, one could not escape this calamity. The saints looked distantly at the other end of mountain and sea, where everything that had transpired over hundreds of billions of years seemed to transform into specks of light, flowing and converging towards the beginning of mountain and sea. Initially, it was silent, but as the light continuously converged, it gradually formed a surging tide. Even though there were often void realms obstructing it, the giant waves merely crashed lightly and then surged past them. In the face of this unstoppable tide, the saints also felt an attraction from the beginning of mountain and sea, like a place of return. Even if they could temporarily stabilize their figures, bits and pieces within their bodies were already beginning to uncontrollably dissipate. Not just the Zhongsheng of mountain and sea. The void realm also could not escape this change. In the darkness, there seemed to be shadows constantly churning and surging. Threads of obscure light flew out from the void realm, rushing towards the beginning of mountain and sea. As if being forcibly divided and extracted, a huge rumbling sound and a piercing friction sound appeared simultaneously. Even those previously swallowed by the void realm cannot escape. This. Who is the saint of divided soul? Amidst this drastic change, Li Fan's attention was more focused on the Shanhai stone slab. The petrified mountain and sea, compared to its normal state, had stronger resistance to this return. But not by much. It persisted for roughly twice the time, but ultimately could not escape the fate of returning to the god. Like gusts of knife-like wind, the undulating patterns on the stone slab were gradually smoothed out. The various Tao principles that Li Fan had previously comprehended on the Shanhai stone slab were swept along by the torrent, heading towards the new god at the beginning of mountain and sea. Ultimately, the so-called hard stone slab slowly transformed into countless grains of sand, disappearing without a trace. Zhou Wei, fellow Taoist, what you just said about returning to the void realm, I am willing to try. At this critical moment, Duan Chen was the first to speak. The trend of returning to the god intensified. During the period of the saints' hesitation, not only had their own existence already dissipated by nearly a tenth, but their figures could no longer maintain stability. They were like a stirred inkblot, uncontrollably flowing towards the beginning of mountain and sea. Even the influence the saints could exert on the outside world was greatly diminishing. Specifically, the saints' telepathic messages were intermittent and as faint as the buzzing of mosquitoes. If Li Fan were not still in his peak state, he might have overlooked them amidst this grand scene of mountain and sea returning to the god. While the saints were in distress, Li Fan could still maintain his peak strength. This was because the moment Li Fan detected the anomaly, he enveloped himself with change of truth and falsehood. Being in between truth and falsehood, even when facing the surging tide of returning to the god, he could remain seated, calm and at ease. If the current mountain and sea was a great river constantly flowing towards the East Sea, then the alliance formed by Li Fan, Shou Chu, and Dao De was a small boat on that river. Although they could not stop the great flow of the river, they could temporarily and barely protect themselves. Li Fan temporarily ignored the saints' calls and instead frowned, asking, how does Shou Chu view this new god? Although he sees the fruit of mountain and sea's divided soul, he probably cannot be called a true God. At best, he is merely a new cycle of mountain and sea. Shochu hit the nail on the head. Li Fan couldn't help but smile. At the very least, within the great Tao of returning to Truth Hall, all Taos remain unmoved. At the very least, our change of truth and falsehood remains as stable as a mountain. Since we are like this, there must be others like us in mountain and sea. Compared to that true God, he is still far inferior. There's even the Void Realm. Although the Void Realm was forced to spit out what it swallowed from mountain and sea, the Void Realm itself has not dissipated. Not to mention, Star. This new God will inevitably have to confront the Void Realm. I see this as just another cycle restarting, ultimately unable to escape the outcome of a lone star descending. Dao also nodded in agreement. However, Shochu suddenly looked solemn, as if he had foreseen something. Compared to mountain and sea, this new God probably won't sit idly by so easily. After he finishes dealing with the old mountain and sea, what he will likely do is absorb us remnants. No matter, by then, let him taste the power of Huan Zhen. Li Fan chuckled. Having awakened parts of his past memories, Li Fan had no doubt whether Huan Zhen could suppress this new God. In countless reincarnations of the past, scenes like today had also appeared. But in the end, Huan Zhen always managed to reset everything. Since Huan Zhen can return to the star with a single thought, he can naturally also shed the God with a single thought. Let us flow with the current, and get a closer look at the true face of that new God. Li Fan narrowed his eyes. Shochu and Dao naturally agreed. As for the other saints, in the torrent of returning to the God, the saints had long been unable to maintain their own appearances. Only distorted afterimages remained, completely disfigured, still shouting something at Li Fan. However, their connection with reality became increasingly tenuous, so much so that even Li Fan found it difficult to hear them clearly. However, the foundation of the great Tao still exists. Rather than benefiting the new God, it's better to benefit me. Let them enter the great Tao of returning to truth. The so-called return to the Void Realm was originally just a trick to delay. Now that the saints were powerless to resist, Li Fan no longer concealed himself, revealing his sharp fangs. With a wave of his sleeve, he swept all the struggling afterimages of the saints into his grasp. Thief of opportunities, Gui Ming, Duan Chen, Yi Pan, Xing Cha. On the Huan Zhen panel, lines of characters quietly appeared. Some were already there, and after this absorption, they became clearer. Others were newly seated, adding bricks and tiles to the great Tao of returning to Truth Hall. As for the saints' astonishment or feelings, Li Fan naturally didn't care. While savoring the taste of the saints, he swiftly moved along the torrent of returning to the God, rushing towards the beginning of mountain and sea. Without the obstruction of the Void Realm, and with the raging tide, their speed was incredibly fast. In the blink of an eye, they had already traversed 5 or 6/10 of the billions of years of time. However, as he drew closer to the new God, the sense of destined return that Li Fan perceived grew stronger. Even with the protection of change of truth and falsehood, his own existence and the foundation of his Tao were gradually falling into instability. He could only huddle together with Shochu and Dao for warmth. The new God is still gestating. Even if we haven't seen him yet, observing this momentum, we know he is extraordinary. Dao and Shochu both spoke with emotion. The three-in-one entity, in an instant, traversed another 50 billion years. They were now closer to the beginning of mountain and sea, where the new God resided. With Li Fan's current comprehension of change of truth and falsehood, he could no longer maintain the Zhou Wei Great Tao in the new God's hands. The wind of returning to the God twisted and deformed change of truth and falsehood, as if it could break at any moment. At this point, the outer garment of Zhou Wei is useless to me. Li Fan no longer forced it and decisively abandoned the Zhou Wei Great Tao. Golden light scattered into the surrounding torrent. Having shed his outer garment, Li Fan immediately felt the pressure on himself greatly reduced. Change of truth and falsehood no longer needed to maintain other things, only to protect Li Fan's conscious existence. Dao followed suit. Only Shochu could still persevere. As the helmsman of this small boat, he continued to lead them towards the location of the new God. I see fellow Taoist fan seems to be searching for something along the way. Is it the 2 white dots you saw hidden within mountain and sea back then? Shochu asked while steering. Li Fan nodded. At the end of time, mountain and sea fell into the void realm. Everything ceased to exist, only 2 white dots leapt out. Facing the erosion of the void realm, Their tenacity was even greater than that of the entire mountain and sea. From this, one can see the strength of these two white dots. However, they are extremely well hidden. Apart from the ultimate end of a lone star descending, I have never seen them in other circumstances. Now that mountain and sea is returning to the god, even the obstructing void realm has been swept away. This is the best time to observe them. It's just. Li Fan frowned slightly. We have traversed most of mountain and sea's life, yet their traces are still nowhere to be seen. Strange. At this moment, mountain and sea has not yet completely dissipated. They might still be able to hide. Let's observe further. The closer they got to the beginning of mountain and sea, the faster the return speed. Only the last 10 billion years of the journey remained to the new god's location. Even Shouchu had to abandon his own Tao path. The three of them were left with only a shared consciousness of unity, riding on the small boat named Change of Truth and Falsehood. The true Lord of Longevity should have fallen in the battle of divided soul. For a period of time, I alone enjoyed the great Tao of longevity. Compared to before, I indeed have different insights. I just don't know if I can contend for the position of Lord of Longevity. Shouchu suddenly spoke. Li Fan felt a little strange upon hearing this. Because in the state of unity, he actually hadn't detected Shouchu's enlightenment. Only after a moment did he understand. Not only the Tao paths of the three, but even the effect of unity gradually disappeared as they got closer and closer to the beginning of mountain and sea. Even though they had known each other for so long and experienced so many things. A sense of vigilance instinctively arose in Li Fan's heart. Unity had not completely failed yet, and Li Fan's thoughts were naturally perceived by Shouchu and Daoda. They couldn't help but smile wryly. Fellow Taoist fan, you really are cautious. It seems that only with unity can you truly feel at ease. However, caution is always wise. Facing their teasing, Li Fan didn't feel embarrassed. With Shouchu's talent, a mere Lord of Longevity will surely be easily obtained. Furthermore, this battle of divided soul, in the next life, we might not be unable to. Li Fan was speaking when he suddenly stopped. In that instant, amidst the rapid downstream traverse, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a standing figure. The small boat carrying Li Fan and the other two swiftly sailed towards the beginning of mountain and sea, propelled by the great tide of returning to the god. And that figure actually seemed to be able to remain motionless in the torrent. The two sides passed each other in an instant, and Li Fan could only vaguely make out a general outline. Just now, it was one of the two white dots. Li Fan stated with certainty. Appearance and physique could be disguised, but that unique aura could not be changed. But it wasn't the one I encountered when I first entered the infinite sea. However, its strength is equally unfathomable. Li Fan, currently in the torrent of returning to the god, naturally understood how terrifying the devouring power from the new god was at this moment. But that figure just now still had an air of calm and ease. He seemed to feel a hint of surprise at Li Fan, the passerby, but he did not follow to investigate further. Instead, he continued to choose to lie dormant and observe. Did Shouchu see the other party's true nature clearly? Because the effect of unity had weakened a bit more, Li Fan actively asked. Shouchu pondered for a moment, then shook his head slightly. Now that all Taos are returning to the god, all Tao paths within mountain and sea should be unavoidable. But that figure can be unaffected. Truly strange. And he neither goes nor leaves. He seems to be waiting for something. Waiting. Could it be? Li Fan felt something in his heart, suddenly raised his head, and looked forward. The last 10 billion years of time had passed in a flash. Upon reaching this point, their speed suddenly slowed down. Like 100 rivers converging, the essence of life from all periods of mountain and sea converged here, forming a dazzling and eerie vortex. Static, rotating, devouring, radiating outwards. Converging, erupting, numerous contradictions filled the space, but because of the existence at the center of the vortex, all mutually exclusive existences were able to coexist. God, it wasn't an act of crying. Rather, the moment he saw this giant vortex, the god's shadow actively leapt into his vision. Subsequently, his consciousness was churned upside down, shattered into pieces. All other consciousness ceased to exist, only the god's shadow echoed incessantly. Li Fan never expected that even a new god who merely replaced mountain and sea, even a new god still in gestation, would possess such terrifying might. Even with the protection of Change of Truth and Falsehood, and even with the three saints relying on their unity. Under the reflection of the god's shadow, his consciousness was easily shattered. He had almost no power to resist. The small boat capsized, falling into the giant vortex. Along with all things in mountain and sea, it slowly converged towards the new god at the center. After an unknown period of unconsciousness, Li Fan gradually regained clarity. In a daze, he recalled what had just happened, and then observing his current situation, he couldn't help but be greatly alarmed. Although he seemed to have been unconscious for a long time, he hadn't gotten much closer to the god. The new god's speed in digesting the entire essence of mountain and sea seemed not particularly fast. Li Fan had only moved a little closer within the vortex. The reason he woke up was because Taoist sacrificed himself, using his remaining consciousness as nourishment. Coupled with Shou Chu's continued sustenance, this was what woke Li Fan. Fellow Taoist fan, look at the new god ahead. It seems his state is a bit off. Shou Chu's weak voice came, and Li Fan's heart stirred. He couldn't help but look in that direction. 1760. Creation captures the heart. Chapter 1746. Creation seizes hearts. Though he was at the edge of the vortex, almost a step away from where the new god was located, he still couldn't see its true face. He could only perceive a gigantic god's shadow standing within the vortex, silently absorbing billions of light rays. It seemed to be in a deep sleep, without any fluctuations in qi. If one didn't look at it, one wouldn't even be able to detect its existence. This was completely different from the overbearing manner in which the god's shadow had just appeared in Li Fan's mind and knocked him unconscious. Taoist Shou Chu, what exactly happened? How do I feel? Li Fan asked, full of doubt and surprise. It seems I'm not the only one who felt it. The new god is truly dead, Shou Chu gasped with difficulty, appearing extremely weak. The new god is dead. With a subtle feeling of confirmation in his heart, Li Fan stared blankly ahead. The feeling immediately changed again. The god's shadow stood tall, still sacred, majestic, and unreachable. But within it, there was no expected spiritual consciousness. It was merely an empty shell, mechanically carrying out the new god's mission of devouring everything. Li Fan observed for a moment, then was startled to realize that the gigantic figure in front of him seemed to be materializing from nothing in his mind. He immediately closed his eyes tightly, no longer looking. Only when the god's shadow completely disappeared from his mind did he finally let out a sigh of relief. Even if it's just a god's corpse, it's not something we, in our heavily injured state, can covet. Even if we were at our full strength before, at most we could probably only protect ourselves. Even without the enhancement of shared purpose, Shou Chu instantly captured Li Fan's thoughts and advised him. Though somewhat unwilling, Li Fan tried again and had to admit that Shou Chu was right. Mountain and sea returning to God was a complete reshuffling of all power in the world. Everything was lost, and the only winner was this newly born god before them. Under the vast torrent, all saints could only drift away like ants in the wind. Li Fan and Shou Chu were able to hold on until now, relying entirely on the protection of change of truth and falsehood. Looking around, everything in the mountain and sea had vanished and been annihilated. Only pure energy radiance remained, continuing to fall towards the central god's shadow in the silent vortex. When the vortex was completely absorbed by the god, that would be the true advent of the new god. But for some unknown reason, something had gone awry. The new god had fallen before it was even established. The initial saints of mountain and sea, who risked their lives to contend for the divided soul, probably never imagined that becoming a god would only last for a moment, ending in such a fate. As the vortex slowly drifted, Li Fan still reluctantly opened his eyes from time to time. He observed the appearance of the god's corpse. He had also tried to comprehend and absorb the surrounding radiance. But it was not the Tao, nor the mountain and sea. It was not anything Li Fan had ever encountered in previous reincarnations. It seemed to be solely the nourishment for shaping the new god. He tried various methods, even great Tao of returning to truth, but could not utilize it in the slightest. He could only focus all his attention on the god's corpse. Li Fan suddenly thought of the figure he had glimpsed during the torrent of returning to God. His heart stirred. Could it be that what he was waiting for was the new god's demise? Did he foresee this so early? This means. His thoughts followed his heart. Change of truth and falsehood once again tightly enveloped him. Completely hidden within the endless radiance of the vortex, not revealing a single trace. I hope that one arrives in time. Li Fan silently calculated the remaining time before he would fall into the god's shadow, while waiting. Who knew how long had passed? When Li Fan had already fallen halfway into the vortex, even if he didn't observe the god's shadow, its influence could still penetrate change of truth and falsehood and take shape within Li Fan's perception. And then take over. The sense of crisis in his heart was hard to suppress. Li Fan forcefully stopped the thought of Huan Zhen. He wanted to observe further changes. It should be coming soon. At this moment, outside the vortex, no more light points were flying in. The god's shadow seemed to have completed its absorption of the entire mountain and sea. The mountain and sea no longer existed. Within the outermost light ring of the vortex was the only remaining existence in the world. The god's nourishment. Why is the illusory realm not moving? Or, am I, being in the vortex, unable to perceive what's outside that light ring? Besides me, are there other existences hidden here? The god's figure had already occupied more than half of his thoughts. Li Fan tried his best to ignore it, striving to use thought to resist the invasion of the god's shadow. Compared to these questions, Li Fan's memories of his countless past reincarnations seemed more suitable as protection. When he began to try to recall the past, the god's figure, imperceptibly, dimmed. As if grasping at a life-saving straw, Li Fan plunged into the torrent of past memories. Even though they were still blurry, he observed more than he would under normal circumstances. I did indeed encounter the new god's advent in the past. And Huan Zhen reset it. But for the new god to be born and then quickly fall, as I'm experiencing. This has never happened before. Why did the new god fall? Under the dual protection of the memory torrent and change of truth and falsehood, Li Fan got closer and closer to the god's shadow. So close that he felt he could glimpse its secret. At this moment, the figure Li Fan had long been waiting for finally appeared. A dazzling white light crashed through the outer ring of the vortex, suddenly entering the nourishment of the god's corpse. It seemed to have anticipated the scene within the vortex. Without any hesitation, it rushed straight towards the central god's shadow. The originally calm, radiant nourishment instantly churned into a monstrous storm, attempting to engulf this audacious intruder who dared to blaspheme the god. The god's wrath was indeed unbearable for a mortal. Even if that white light was one of the few survivors after the great tribulation of mountain and sea returning to God. It dimmed by half in a very short time under the engulfment of the surrounding endless radiance. But its momentum, like a thunderbolt, never ceased. In an instant, it tore open a corner of the vortex and rushed to the edge of the god's shadow. It seemed as if, in the next moment, it would enter the god's corpse. To seize the god's creation. Li Fan, observing from the shadows, felt his heart suddenly stop at that moment. He instinctively wanted to block it and contend with it. Fortunately, he was ultimately powerless, and Shou Chu's calm dissuasion helped him dispel the suicidal thought. However, other hidden existences did not choose to continue observing. Within the turbulent vortex, just an instant before the white light was about to crash into the god's corpse, 3 other different lights suddenly erupted. One white, one purple, one green. This other white light was precisely the existence Li Fan had sensed at the bottom of the infinite sea. Now, the two sides finally met again, and the situation had changed. Li Fan was hidden in the dark, while the other party was exposed in the open. As he witnessed the other party again in an instant, scenes flashed rapidly through Li Fan's mind. Taoist Fan, have we met before? A figure in flowing white robes, tall and slender, asked politely. Li Fan remained silent. Outside the two, the scene of the Tao annihilation tide roaring could vaguely be seen. Without dwelling on the question, the two joined hands to resist the calamity. This is the 4th time I've asked you this question, Taoist Fan, do you still choose not to answer? It was still the voice of the tall, slender figure. However, the surrounding mountain and sea environment had undergone drastic changes. The originally bright and vibrant background was now dark and desolate. And the two who were once companions working together were now standing opposite each other, swords drawn. Facing the tall figure's question, Li Fan still remained silent. HMPH. No answer. Then die. Billions of dazzling white lights simultaneously ascended, temporarily dispelling the darkness. Each light was like a sharp sword, filled with soaring killing intent. Pointing directly at Li Fan. Taoist Fan, have we met before? Another familiar scene. This time, the tall figure asked again. However, his expression, compared to that scene from countless reincarnations ago, seemed to have undergone a subtle change. Li Fan still chose to remain silent. However, the cultivator's figure did not get angry because of it. Instead, he showed a thoughtful expression. When true is false, false is true. Even after billions of reincarnations, Li Fan could grasp every subtle change. He very keenly detected the tall figure's unusual movement, and without any hesitation, he directly activated change of truth and falsehood, resetting the mountain and sea. There are countless heroes in the mountain and sea, how can they all be deceived? A long sigh echoed. ... Boom, boom, boom. The huge waves stirred by the violent collision woke Li Fan from his past memories. Without time to ponder their meaning, Li Fan only looked at the changes in the field. The white, purple, and green lights arrived later but got there first, blocking the initial light that came from outside the light ring. With the 4 light points gathered, Li Fan could finally clearly see the difference between the 2 white lights. The tall figure, hidden within the vortex of the god's nourishment, who was suspected to be Li Fan's old acquaintance, was a starry silver white. And the light that came from outside, the one that had brushed past Li Fan earlier, was a desolate pale white. Though seemingly similar, the paths they represented were entirely different. As for the purple and green colors, before Li Fan could think, another anomaly occurred in the field. The pale light, which was the initiator of breaking the calm, was blocked by the other 3 lights. It only paused for a moment, then moved in the opposite direction. Its figure retreated rapidly, a white line tearing open the vortex again. It had come and now it was going back. Did it retreat in the face of difficulty, or? What made Li Fan feel a sudden chill was that it wasn't just the pale light. The other 3 lights, after pausing for a moment, also, by unspoken agreement, scattered and fled. They wanted to escape this huge vortex. Bang, bang. Li Fan's heart inexplicably pounded violently. The outermost light ring of the vortex suddenly dimmed. The turbulent nourishment vortex, at this instant, fell into absolute stillness. And then, the central figure, the god's corpse that Li Fan thought was dead, suddenly opened its eyes. The 4 lights had entered the god's sight. The standing divine body disappeared from Li Fan's field of observation. Next to disappear was the green light point, which was originally closest to the god's shadow. It vanished silently, without even stirring the slightest ripple. Seeing this, the remaining 2 white and 1 purple light increased their speed even further. The pale light had already collided with the outermost edge of the vortex. But, it was easy to come, but hard to leave. That dim white circle was no longer as easily broken as before. Under the violent collision, the pale light point instantly shrunk a few points. However, it did manage to break open a gap. After flickering a few times, the pale light point successfully escaped. And the silver white point, representing the tall figure, also followed the pale footsteps and successfully fled before the encirclement closed. As for the purple light, it wasn't so lucky. Like a mosquito, it was easily crushed by an invisible hand. The purple light point was suddenly erased. Having easily dealt with 2 hidden insects, the god did not reveal itself. Nor did it choose to pursue the 2 white points. The nourishment vortex remained in a static state. The outermost light ring of the vortex flickered between bright and dim. It was as if the god's gaze was constantly sweeping through the vortex, as if searching for something. Li Fan dared not breathe, trying his best to maintain his illusion becomes reality state. At this moment, he had already understood. There was no god's fall. Everything was merely a trap laid by this newly ascended god. Crude, but very effective. After all, no one had ever seen the scene after successfully seizing the god's creation. When faced with a god's corpse that had no ability to resist, and countless pure nourishments, even the remaining saints would find it hard to resist such temptation. After all, they had come here precisely to contend for the divided soul. Even if someone might have anticipated that it could be a trap. When other saints made their move, the rest were destined to be unable to hold back. To seize the god, if one hesitated for a step, it meant handing over the creation. Even knowing it was a trap, one had to fight with all one's might. It was a trap, but also an open conspiracy. Having already become a new god, crushing other saints is as easy as crushing ants. Yet it still resorts to such insidious tricks. Who exactly is it? The new god's gaze became more frequent. It seemed certain that there were still insects hidden within the vortex. It was persistent, constantly repeating. Li Fan's uneasy premonition grew stronger and stronger, as if he would be discovered at any moment. But he also dared not rashly activate Huan Zhen. After all, under the new god's gaze, his mind would probably go blank instantly, and he wouldn't even have time to activate Huan Zhen. Taoist fan, act according to the circumstances. Let me meet this so-called god. Shou Chu's voice slowly came. Then, a towering figure appeared, leaping into the god's vortex. Wherever his steps landed, the radiance parted. Shou Chu parted the sea, revealing his original form. His hair and beard flowing, he confronted the new god. After becoming a god, you are completely unrecognizable. There's a familiar aura about you. But I can't recognize who you are. Shou Chu's voice echoed, seemingly deliberately for Li Fan to hear. The new god remained unmoved. The turbulent vortex dimmed again. As if in the next moment, Shou Chu would be crushed. But, when true is false, false is true, Shou Chu slowly chanted, his long robe fluttering without wind. His figure suddenly became ethereal, and outside him, a pair of large hands seemed to flash by in a blur. Grabbing at empty space, I once sat on a mountain and gazed at the sea. Now the mountain and sea are no more. I shall stand and annihilate the god. As if a strong wind was blowing, Shou Chu's clothes fluttered ceaselessly. He exhausted his understanding of change of truth and falsehood, and pointed lightly at the new god beyond the void. Ripples gently spread through the nourishment vortex. As if something had changed. But then again, everything seemed unchanged. Huan Zhen. At this opportune moment, Li Fan roared in his heart.